5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Today I will be interviewing the great researcher and whistleblower, Richard Grove. Richard, how are you?
I'm excellent, Keith. How are you doing? I'm clicking buttons here. I'm also doing the broadcast part of the show for Keith. So if you guys see me clicking around, I was helping him try to raise the production value. I said, let's use this new software. You can use it. It's pretty cheap, and it'll add a lot of value for your interviews. Morning, afternoon. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. So glad to have you. Richard and I have been trying to set this up since February, so I've been really looking forward to this. And
I was moving. That was part of the issue. I apologize for that.
No problem. You're definitely worth the wait. Richard runs tragedyandhope.com, which is basically an open source intelligence discussion forum. A lot of great research on there. Rich, can you give us a summary of what tragedyandhope.com entails?
Well, it's a longer story. So the briefness of it is tragedyandhope.com is a place where I've published my media, which includes podcasts, films, and a composition that I call the History Blueprint, which is like a network diagram so that people can dig into the topics of history that I cover in my work. It's all about pretty much 19th and 20th century North American, Anglo-American history of how we got into World War I, how we got into World War II, how 9/11 happened, this sort of thing. And we'll get to it I'm sure later in this discussion, but I named it after a famous history book. So tragedyandhope.com is like the landing spot for all the different types of media I've produced for the past 12 or 13 years.
Great. And I always mention my favorite work of whoever I'm talking to. Rich has a great interview with John Taylor Gatto and Charlotte Thompson Iserbit. I can't pick one of those. Rich, I'm curious, what do you think is the greatest threat to freedom?
Well, I've heard a lot of people talk about this lately, and they always want to say it's this group or another group, and some people are saying it's the Muslims, and other people are saying it's the Chinese, and some people say it's the communists, and some people say it's the socialists. I think the greatest threat to freedom and human liberty on this planet is ignorance. Is people's willingness to accept something as knowledge without really asking any questions or learning about it for themselves. And I think that's what's at the root cause of a lot of the divisive nature that you see going on in this country right now, where it looks like we're being kindled into a civil war. And I think it's so unnecessary, and I can see how disingenuous to the truth all the arguments that are being presented as either left or right arguments really are. And I think there's a higher perspective where you can see those arguments for what they are, see them as non-solutions, and actually start to figure out, like, what are the root causes? How do we, mitigate those root causes and those risks and find solutions? Did that answer your question?
Yeah. What is the war on consciousness?
Well, if you look at human history over any type of long-term time span, whether it's a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years, what you see is, in the literature left behind, a war on consciousness. There have always been people on this planet who just wanted to do what they saw fit, what they wanted to do. They wanted to be left alone. And there's always been other groups of people who thought that they had the right to rule and enslave other people's bodies, but really, in order to effectively enslave their bodies, you have to enslave their minds. And this has been going on pretty much since human writing ever came into effect. When you look back at the first use of the word freedom was in Sumerian cuneiform in these clay tablets, and it's called the Amagi or the Amagi. I first learned about this. It's on the frontispiece of Carol Quigley's Evolution of Civilizations. And I thought, what's that mean? And I think it's the symbol of Liberty Press. I think they're still maybe around. So here's this idea, freedom. Why was it not found earlier in writing? Well, I would argue that most people were free before that, and that some people came across some other people who took away their freedom. And they said, we need a word for what we just lost. We didn't have a word for it because it was like, fish swimming in water. They don't need to know. It's like so part of their reality, they didn't have a word for it. But when it's taken away, when you're enslaved, then you need a word for that thing you're trying to get back. So the concept of freedom has been around, and the concept of trying to get it back to attain it, maintain it, and retain it has been around as long as there's been humans writing down symbols and words and trying to tell people in the future what happened at those times.
In one of your interviews at PorcFest, someone interviews you and asks you, what is freedom? You respond, the absence of slavery. How would you define slavery?
Well, slavery is not being able to pursue what you want to do with your mind and body, right? I believe in freedom insofar as long as you're not taking away the freedom of somebody else, that you have the freedom to do things. I don't believe in the freedom extending so far as to take advantage of or hurt other people. I think that's obviously aggression. Not everyone has conceptualized these ideas, right? Slavery. So the definition that you cited is the apophatic, the negative, the absence of it, right? Freedom exists in one's ability to ask questions, find substantial answers, and act on that knowledge. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. How can someone determine whether or not they are free?
It's a good question. Well, if you have to ask someone to go to the bathroom, you're not free. If somebody tells you what to study at what time and you can't pursue what your mind wants to do and what you're inquiring into, that's not freedom. So a lot of people who tune into your channel have these questions about government. I think the only legitimate form of government is parenting, and that by the end of parenting, that parental government, that person should be autonomous and not need somebody to tell them how to act without taking away people's freedom, right? I think the operating system of cognitive liberty, of non-aggression, plus intellectual self-defense, plus physical self-defense, is the missing ingredients, are the missing ingredients in the recipe for an education. It's exactly what they take out of public schooling to make people dependent and subservient and easily malleable and a goldfish-like mentality.
What is the Trivium method?
I'm behind in my cutting. Hold on a second here. I'll just leave it on this shot. This was the experiment to see if I could cut the angles back and forth live. I don't seem to be doing it too well.
It's all right. It's hard to double task like that. All right. So
okay.
I
So
will
the
start.
Trivium method. I can just roll with it, dude.
Okay.
Do it live. All right. So the classical Trivium, which should be distinguished from the Trivium method. The classical Trivium is an idea that's been around for thousands of years and permeated through Greece and Rome and the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. There's a lot of religiosity with it, but it's a theological encoding of how to reason. So it's interesting how you add this theological layer on there and it takes away people's ability to reason certain things. But it was originally the notion of grammar, which are the individual words for the parts that make something up, the logic, how those parts fit together, and the rhetoric, how to communicate that or put it into action, right? It's the same way that any type of legit instructions are, presented to you. Open some Legos. Here are the individual parts. Here's how they go together. Here's how to play with the toy. Then you're having fun. So it's this primary methodology of learning that was harnessed by churches and governments and states to entrain their people. And there's a prescribed data set. So you're not supposed to go outside that data set. So the opposite of that, so that's a technology, and it can be used to enslave minds or to unenslaved minds, to liberate minds, right? The Trivium method is one's ability outside of the social or religious or state structure to observe on their own. What are the individual parts? How do these fit together? How can I put this into action or communicate it to somebody else? That's the rhetoric part, right? So it's really, to use a computer metaphor, it's like input, processing, and output. The input, here's this thing in objective reality, right? There's a there's a cap down here, there's a cap in here, there's a lens hood, there's a focus ring, there's a zoom ring, there's a bunch of buttons, right? So by learning the words of all the different pieces, that's the grammar part of it. And then the logic is, how do these all work together? And then the rhetoric is, put this on a camera and go take pictures that are clear and crisp and people are in focus. So it can be applied to anything, and you can learn anything with the method. But the method obviously isn't advertised in public schooling because it would make people very unmanageable, if that makes sense.
Your website is dedicated to or is titled tragedyandhope.com, based on a book by Carroll Quigley. Who was Carroll Quigley?
Well, Carroll Quigley was a very establishment type character. He's the type of guy who would be trained by Rhodes scholars and educated at Princeton and Harvard and taught at these places, was a consultant for the military Department of Defense, lived in Georgetown, taught at Georgetown's School of Foreign Service. So he's a very establishment type of guy. And he was very close to people in the Council on Foreign Relations. And he actually had a whistleblower who was inside this secret society group of people in America and Britain who wanted to see America brought back into the British Empire. So it's a long story. In fact, Quigley's book is like 1,300 pages. And the first book that this Professor Quigley wrote was in 1948, and it was called The Anglo-American Establishment. And it's a book about this thick, not very big, couple hundred pages, very clear and concise and to the point about this plan to bring America back into the British Empire, the people in the plan, how they were funded, how they had taken root in America, and how America was on a collision course with being used as the spearhead for globalism and a new world order. Quigley was too scared to lose his career to put that book in print. So that book, it's written in 1948. It doesn't come out till 1981 after Quigley dies. Quigley, 20 years later, almost 19 years later. So he spends the next 19 years researching the Council on Foreign Relations archives, which they invited him in to do, to kind of be their in-house historian, so that people on the Anglo-American side had a clean idea of what the actual history was, because everything being fed to the American public was like, BS, for lack of a better, more descriptive phrase. It is an accurate phrase. So Quigley writes this book called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. And like I said, it's 1,300 pages. And in there, a few select pages provide enormous insight, credible insight into how the world works. So this is 1966. We all should have heard about this book by now, right? Well, in like 1967, Macmillan, the publisher, destroys the plates to the book, so there's no second printing. They destroy the plates to the book. They republish the book, but only the second half. So the whole how it happened is taken out, and they're like, here's what happened later. And it's republished in 1968 as a book called The World Since 1939, A History, which is very rare. You don't need to get it because you could just buy the whole book, Tragedy and Hope, today. It's been reprinted as of 2004. But for like 30 years, this book was pretty hard to get a hold of. Very hard. And for good reason. He spills the beans in there. And then he does an interview with the New York Times complaining about how they censored his book and lied to him and all this other stuff. So even though he's not a believer in the conspiracy per se, he's the historian of it and was definitely definitely adversely affected by it. So I don't necessarily, I'm not a big fan of the man, because I'm just like looking into the work and what are the facts. I find that a lot of things can get muddied by generating unnecessary opinions on people who aren't even here anymore. So what can we learn from Quigley? What was useful, and how can we go forward? So when it came time to name my site, I launched in 2009 Tragedy and Hope, because that was something that I knew even 50 years from now, people would still need to know about that story. It's still adversely affecting them.
You have a book coming out, The Truth About the Rothschilds. First of all, I think the cover is very intriguing. It's a guy in a top hat sitting on top of a turtle. I want you to explain that cover to us and tell me who the Rothschilds are and why they're so important. You need to write a book about them.
That's a big question. Let me try to handle that. Yesterday, I saw a tweet of somebody. Somebody had tagged me in it, and it was this guy riding a turtle down. It was like mistreatment of an animal, and people were talking about it. And then somebody who follows me on Twitter posted the cover from my book. It says, "Oh, Lord Rothschild rode on a turtle," and so the symbolism is, well, the actual photo. It's a 1901, 1902 photo of this guy, Lord Rothschild. And he's riding around on this giant tortoise. He's leading the tortoise around by hanging a stick in front of the tortoise's head that has a piece of lettuce on it. And there's a little piece of lettuce hanging out of the tortoise's mouth. I took this as a metaphor for how banking rules the world. They're hanging the lettuce out in front of people. And as long as you're eating that lettuce, you're going to go wherever that stick is. I think it's accurate. I think the difference between ourselves and the tortoise is that we have the ability to ask questions. We have the ability to question obedience. So I made a t-shirt that has that logo on it and it says question obedience. That was a couple years before I started the book project. And when the book project came around, I thought that's still the most educational and telling and interesting photo associated with the project. So that's why it's still on the cover. Now the question, who are the Rothschilds? Let me ask you this. What were you taught in school about the Rothschilds? Where did you go to public school? Private school?
I went to public school, for 12 years.
Okay, I went to public school too. Did you go to any university courses?
Yeah, I was kicked out of 2 universities for bad grades and then a community college.
Lucky you, man. You should be proud. I hope you are. All right, so you're on a better path right now. So this is a topic that everybody should learn about in school, just like if you know about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, FDR and Teddy Roosevelt and these characters, JFK, then you need to understand the Rothschild family. And I think it's, well, first, I guess the origin of the book project goes back a long time. And then we could talk about how it actually came to fruition, because there was a Stefan Molyneux project that was in there that I was like, oh, I can take what I've already got and take it to the next step. But it's because going to school, public school, going to university, getting a degree, making a very successful living in the corporate world, and then finding out that there's this family that has had an immense influence over world history, construction of railroads and subways and huge real estate projects and mining and minerals and all these different things. And it's always left out of whatever version of the story we're told about anything. And so when I first heard about it, it was so like cliche and conspiratorial. You're reading things on the web. It's not well documented. There's a lot of hyperbole. There's a lot of exaggeration. And I ignored it for a little bit. I was like, there's probably nothing there, right? But then I said, how can I resolve this question of the internet being so confusing? Like, you can read anything out there. David Icke will say that they're reptile lizard people, right? And Neil Ferguson will be like, there's nothing to see here. He writes a whole bunch of books about them. So what I did was I wanted to go away from the internet. I wanted to collect whatever books, autobiographies, biographies, that had been written by, for, about this family for the past couple hundred years. And really, it's from like 1780s to present. They still have an enormous influence, unseen, unrecognized, maybe out of balance influence. You can't make a judgment on that because so much is hidden. So as I started to collect all this evidence and just take it in, fascinating books. I have like 40 or 50 of them. And then so I got contacted by Stefan Molyneux's assistant, and they were doing the Truth About series on a bunch of different topics. And they said, we'd like a 1-hour presentation, research on Truth About the Rothschilds. Could you help us out? And I said, I just so happen to have all this research. And so I said, what's the deadline? And we negotiated the deadline, and I turned it over. And I don't think he's ever aired it or done anything with it. I think there was some other stuff that came up at the time that were higher priority, and he moved off the topic or what have you. But after I turned that in, I had like, let's say you need 10 pages for an hour. I had like 90 pages, and I was just like, pick whatever content you want to fill an hour, and I'll use the rest because I'm going to write a book on this. And then the more I dug into it, the more I kept finding things. I was like, well, people need to know this. This is really interesting. And it's not about I have a position or predisposition on this topic. I just find it interesting. I have the capacity to read all these books and get all these books and like assimilate the information and make it interesting in a presentation. And really what my book is intended to be is a blueprint or a roadmap to all the resources that exist. And here's the information in these resources that tell the story of this family's timeline over like, 250 years. So I wanted to do something to complement and add to the conversation, and not write a book like this guy's wrong and this guy, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to complement and add to the conversation, because many people aren't going to ever find the quotes in these books that are scattered throughout without somebody saying, look, at this point, you want to know about this part, let's read these letters where Solomon the Rothschild comes to America and he's meeting with Judah Benjamin and all these Confederate guys, and he's meeting with people on the North, and he's writing letters back. And you can read the letters he's writing back to his family. That to me is better than any exaggerated, speculatory, hyperbolized lizard people type video that you can get out there. I'm really thirsty for what evidence has been left up to this point, and how can we marshal it to like understand.
So there is a seminar that Neil deGrasse Tyson gives, and in one of the portions he says, I just want to address the topic of conspiracy theories. The questions are, what is your best piece of evidence that this conspiracy exists? And two, what would you need to hear to no longer believe in this conspiracy? Regarding 9/11 and your excellent research, 9/11 synchronicity, I want you to take on Neil deGrasse Tyson's challenge.
First off, I always listen to what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say because he's a smart guy, and he's very knowledgeable in his field of study, which obviously has limits. If there was some piece of evidence that would convince me otherwise, I would want to hear. I want to hear Bush and Cheney's testimony. I want to hear that, and I want to see the surveillance footage of all the guys getting on those planes. I want to see the surveillance footage of the Pentagon. I want to know who placed the insider trades on American Airlines and Marsh & McLennan. I want to know what happened to the gold under Customs House from numerous sources that was there and missing, that was overseen by Kroll Associates. I mean, I could give you a top 100. Maybe we should do that.
Let's do it.
All right, so I was being facetious. That'd be an actual project where I would think about it. But I'll give you a couple more. You want a couple more? That's easy. See that? I did that, and now there it comes. It's clicking back now. I would point to the PNAC document, Project for a New American Century, where these characters said, here's what we desire, and here's what we need. And part of their phrasing for that project that calls for a new Pearl Harbor. Now, to some people, that means, well, you need the Japanese to attack you again. Or if you look at it from the history point of view of what evidence is actually known about that, having a new Pearl Harbor would be having the British use a proxy force to attack America to get America into a war. Because that's what happened with Pearl Harbor. And then if you look at the attack on 9/11, those attacks, those people say it's LIHOP, which is let it happen on purpose, or MIHOP, made it happen on purpose. I say that thinking is too small. I say that LIHOP and MIHOP has been around since World War II. It should have been around since the sinking of the Maine in 1898. It should have been around at the Gulf of Tonkin, right? So there's so much to it. So it's not LIHOP and it's not MIHOP. because MyHop and LIHOP presume that it was only our government that was involved in that. And it's never just our government for the past 60 years. It's always our government plus the British government plus the Israeli government. They are basically inseparable parts of the same organization. That's how, post World War II intelligence and policy making. And you want some evidence of that? Look at these guys from the USS Liberty, still trying to get justice 51 years later because no legitimate congressional inquiry has ever been made into that attack, which was Israel attacked our NSA Navy ship GTR-5 USS Liberty on June 6th, 1967 during the 6 Days War, and it was claimed to be an accident when clearly it was an act of war. It wasn't provoking us into the war, but they needed to do that so that they could take the Golan Heights, and there was a whole bunch of other intricacies going on. It's always been claimed an accident. Now, these veterans who are seeking justice are depending on President Trump, and President Trump just cut funding to the Palestinians and he doubles down on Israel. So there's no way that he's going to embarrass our ally, Israel, much the same way that LBJ said back then that he wasn't going to embarrass our ally, Israel. So people want to say, oh, then it's Israel that attacked 9. No, it's not just Israel. It's Israel, the United States, and the UK that trained if you want to go back, it was the UK, Britain, that created the Muslim Brotherhood, and then that's sold off later as an asset from MI6 to CIA. It's transitioned into Mujahideen in the 70s, turns into Al-Qaeda, currently ISIS, but has always had Anglo-American and Israeli support behind the scenes. So even with the official story, these guys from Saudi Arabia hijacked planes and attacked us. Great. Who funds those guys? Whose guys were those? Those were people's players. Those guys were most likely drug smugglers who were used as the proxy force to engage with the Middle East in the war on terror, because they didn't need to investigate the events to know who did it. They told you the first day, Osama bin Laden, who's a business partner of the Bush family. He's a business partner in BCCI. BCCI was Clark Clifford. He wrote the National Security Act. So all these things go together. They are separate yet intertwined pieces of history. And if people understood the totality of it, they would act very differently, on social media, I would hope.
What is the New World Order, and what evidence do you have that the New World Order exists?
Of Paradise and Power, America and Europe in the New World Order by Robert Kagan. This is a book by one of the guys who wrote the PNAC document. I got something on my wall right here. I don't think you can see it in the shot. Toward a New World Order, The Future of NATO by George Soros. 29 November 1993. It's a pamphlet that he had printed for a NATO meeting. He called it Toward a New World Order. Kissinger, World Order. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Marianne Slaughter, A New World Order. She's a Princeton professor. These are globalists. This is what they call it. But by studying what they say and looking into this, here's one more. This is the context for what I just answered, right? This is Britain's collusion with radical Islam, and in this book, which is written by Mark Curtis, is a very cool dude. He used to be a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. So he's writing this from a very credible position that in London in the 90s, Osama bin Laden had a headquarters. Our good friend and ally, Britain, right? This is not a mention on the American media. And I would think that people who are really interested in honoring and remembering the dead, all these heroes, all those firefighters, all those people that died in the buildings, I think it's our responsibility to know the truth and not just repeat a bunch of BS that we've been told, right? So it's a bit, I always just refer to 9/11 is like this keyhole through which, if you look through it, like there's a door, and this is the keyhole, 9/11. You can see how so much bigger, the world is so much bigger on the other side, because you have to understand all this history that led to 9/11. So when they're saying that, we're going into Syria and we're allied with ISIS right now, It's like, well, wait a minute. Those are the same guys we armed and trained. Not we. Those are the same guys American taxpayer dollars taken forcefully, paid for to train. And that's all part of Operation Gladio. I mean, Gladio, I had this out for a talk the other day. Gladio's secret armies is all about, after World War II, the British and the Americans created stay-behind groups of proxy forces that could carry out terrorist attacks without being linked back to America or Britain, but conveniently acting toward British and American foreign policies. This is a real piece of history, and I think it's just left out of so many conversations. Kennedy's killed during Operation Gladio. Operation Gladio has assassination teams. So before you want to tell me why you think Oswald shot him, like, let's just understand the political landscape. That there was a group of people who carried out assassinations because it was their job, right? They overthrow countries. And then Kennedy pissed them off, fired their director who created all of that. And then the guy he fired ends up being like on the Warren Commission investigating Kennedy's death. And you think it was all Oswald. Well, isn't that just easy and simple? And let's go fertilize the lawn now, because there's nothing else going on in that little mind. I don't know, man. The facts are so much bigger than the official story. The only reason I can't see people getting it is because they haven't been exposed to the facts. But I have to also understand that some people, like, you can lead a man to knowledge, but you can't make him think. And that my audience is made up of the people who think.
Yeah, and sometimes, like you mentioned Pearl Harbor earlier, it really takes a book like Day of Deceit by Robert Stinnett, where he quotes a document called the McCullen Memo, 8 ways we could get the Japanese to attack America. And it's like, when I saw that, I'm like, first of all, that book was published, I think, in it was after 2000. First of all, a 70-year lie, or a 60-year lie, dropped out of university, a 60-year lie was kept undercover. Second, it's been probably 10 or 15 years at the point I found this out. How have I not heard about something like this? So, thank you for referencing those books.
I took a note because I'm not familiar with that memo, and I would like to vet it and see if it's authentic and how it fits in. My position is based on a book called The Double Cross System. This is written by, it was published in like 1972 or 1973. It's written by the former head of MI6 during World War II, John Cecil Masterman. And the whole book is about how they ran double and triple agents in Nazi Germany, in Japan, in America, all over the place. Their intelligence system was superb and very advanced. And 6 months before Pearl Harbor, their spies, it's like like Agent Tricycle. There's the names are all the names of the spies are known, and there's verifiable documents. But long story short, the British spies embedded with the Germans and the Japanese brought a questionnaire to the guys who were running this secret group called the Double Cross Group. And they had credible evidence and understood that this questionnaire is all about Pearl Harbor so that they can bomb it strategically. And they came to America and they told J. Edgar Hoover, they're like, look, we have this agent and this document, and this is all on the record. But they presented the evidence in like a pseudo credible way so that the Americans were just like, oh, well, there's nothing, no big deal. That's not going to happen. Right. And then Masterman says, in hindsight, like, this is his thoughts after they move out of World War II and everything, the world is saved. He's like, the reason we didn't tell the Americans is because our cousins were like new to the intelligence game, and we didn't want to let them know that we were spying, that our spies were that advanced. They were still playing us like an enemy country, and they got us into World War II like that. And then I asked them questions like, well, how did we get into World War I? And that's just a whole can of worms, man, because then you see that one of our closest super allies that we're so in bed with intelligence-wise is definitely got a different agenda for America's future than most Americans. And that's the thing. I see most honest, hardworking people out there just trying to like make ends meet, and their future and their kids' future and their grandkids' future and all the freedom that should have been their birthrights is being set ablaze in a way that it's not going to be recoverable, through some magical phoenix. It takes a long time for freedom to emerge in a human society. I'm not saying that America was perfect then, now, ever will be, but having had more freedom in the past, you can tell when you're losing it. And some people are like the frog in the pot of water that's going to a slow boil. They don't notice it. But I think it's good that I jumped out of that pot a long time ago, that you jumped out of that pot, that most people who watch your videos are either thinking about jumping out of that pot or have, because what we're not being told makes all the difference. It's the essential part they had to hide from us. Otherwise, we'd be doing other things with our time and energy and attention especially. So.
I just want to clarify my Pearl Harbor statement. That is from a book, Day of Deceit by Robert Stinnett is the title. Another book that led me to that conclusion is Infamy by John Toland. Regarding World War I, The Lusitania by Colin Simpson, as well as Room 40 by Patrick Beasley. So I don't want to just throw out things there without citing.
No, that's good. That's excellent. Source. So the Room 40 book, that's the one that talks about how Churchill was in Room 40, which is like the secret encryption code breaking room back then. And the Lusitania is put in harm's way on purpose, and we're not warned. That's just one of the ways they got us into World War I. There's a whole bigger story on that. One of the best, I've read a couple of good books on World War I lately. Lord Milner's Second War is an excellent book, because Lord Milner's first war was the Boer War in South Africa, and that's where they were creating apartheid, and the British set up concentration camps down there. Lord Milner's second war is World War I. And I'll preface this with, I'm a big fan of Dan Carlin. I love long form audio. My brand of long form audio is different than his, but I have a great appreciation for his productions. I listened to his whole von Moltke World War I explanation, and I was like, wow, this is really disingenuous to the facts and evidence that actually exist. So either he doesn't know about this, or he's not interested and doesn't know about this, or he knows and he's like, I'm going to tell you von Moltke, and instead of telling you about the actual Anglo-American establishment that has much more evidence to what they were doing than his version of the story. But I still have much respect, man.
And my final piece of evidence on Pearl Harbor foreknowledge and attempt to provoke an incident is a New York Times article published January 2nd, 1972. I forget the title. I think it's War Plans Entry, but it's right when the British cabinet documents came out. That date alone, searching will bring up that article. All right, Rich, back to the questions. I'm sorry about that. You have been critical of the great ally to the United States, Britain. First of all, how dare you? Second of all, why is the U.S. and British relationship important to focus on?
My disclaimer is I have been to Great Britain. I really like Great Britain. I have a lot of people in my audience and friends before I even broadcasted or put anything out that were British. I don't have a problem with the British people. I have a problem with the British Empire and how it never went away, and how a lot of people have fought and died in this country for what eventually became British objectives. For instance, case in point, 20-year ongoing war in Afghanistan. Afghanistan wasn't involved in 9/11, but that's how we got to Afghanistan. Well, is there a bigger picture? Is there something else I should know? Yeah, the British Empire was domesticating and westernizing Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, all these places that currently U.S. and American military forces occupy and our taxpayer dollars go to fund. There's a lot of shenanigans going on, and a lot of them are allowed because people have these neglected aspects, these things that are occulted or hidden from them, right? If when I said British Empire, you think, oh, that group of people that had a worldwide monopoly on opium and subjugated China for 100 years called the Century of Humiliation. That British Empire? Yeah, that British Empire. They came and took over American intelligence establishment and then, used a whole bunch of that money for black ops. CIA's overthrown all these countries for 60 years. Never without their cousins, the British, being there, and a lot of times in the favor and in service of Israel, right? So it's like three pieces in a machine with three pieces. They're all working to make that machine work. So it's not just one or the other. It's not just the American government's bad or the British Empire is bad or Israeli intelligence or any of this stuff. You have to learn the nuances of the bigger picture. And those three agencies, nations, however you want to see those entities, those are just working groups for other people above that who are supranational and have been for a long time. Did I answer your question now?
Yes.
Got away from the point, I guess.
Yeah, you did.
Right,
who was Cecil Rhodes?
Cecil Rhodes died when he was like 41 or 42. Prior to that, he had a brother who went to South Africa and was doing some gold mining. Cecil Rhodes goes down there. He starts to set up some business down there. Then he goes back to Oxford. And while he's at Oxford, he hears a lecture by this famous Oxford professor, famous if you're British, I guess, of the British Empire persuasion, John Ruskin. And he was painting out how, the British Empire was kind of slipping and they needed a better plan. They needed to be like dominant over the whole world, make English the global language, all these sorts of ideas. Cecil Rhodes thought, oh, this is a great idea. I'm going to go work to that end. So Cecil Rhodes subscribed to this idea of reviving and prolonging the British Empire and its domination over lesser peoples. And he joined Freemasonry, which also had a similar like idea set of empire, because the British had traditionally used Freemasonry as an early trading post to colonize an area. Look at all the trading posts of the Freemasonry spreading in the 1700s, and then look at India and China in the 18 and 1900s, right? Builders of Empire would be the book to look up if you want to know more about that. So Rhodes was part of these two ideologies, and he said he wanted to dedicate his life to manifesting those. So at like age 24, he wrote his first will and testament, and it's basically revised over a series of years. I think the sixth revision, his beneficiary or his executor is Lord Rothschild. And then in later versions, they made it like Lord Rothschild's son-in-law, because he was funded by the Rothschilds to go down and start De Beers and start this empire that became a British colony and then became the state of South Africa under apartheid. So this is all under Cecil Rhodes in the late 1800s. By his death in 1902, he had said that he made this enormous fortune. I mean, De Beers became a monopoly in diamond mining. There was gold mining down there. And he wanted to leave his money to create a secret society to bring America back into the British Empire. And that he wanted part of his money to go to training Rhodes Scholars, which would take the best and brightest from some of these countries that had predispositions to be favorable to Britain, to bring them over, to train them at Oxford, then send them back to their home countries. So today, our government in America has any number of Rhodes Scholars, like National Security Advisor Susan Rice. She's a Rhodes Scholar. And there's a recent British GCHQ memo that has her volunteering to be a stay-behind, a la Operation Gladio, in case Trump wins the election. And they're running surveillance on Trump before he's president. This is the British, the allies. And that's done through the Five Eyes Agreement, where all these Western English kind of countries agree to spy on each other because they don't want to break their own country's rules, right? So these are all known knowns. This is part of the adult conversation of these things. This is like how things actually go on. So there's a lot to it, but the easiest way to think about it is, what are the reasons that we fought against, what are the reasons that Americans of circa 1776 to 1783 were fighting the British? Why? Well, the British gave them some taxes on tea. That didn't spark the revolution. The British tried to disarm American citizens. That started shooting. That started the war. So these topics are still going on today. Taxation without representation, for sure. But are people willing to, tolerate ever increasing amounts of that? Kinda. But people trying to disarm other people, that makes them feel helpless. That makes them feel like a slave. That makes them feel like they can't defend themselves and their family. And that's enough where it had sparked it off in the past, and traditionally that would spark it off. And that's why when someone like Alex Jones goes on Piers Morgan, a British agent on American TV, and he says 17, all that stuff, right? Now, let's go to history. How practical is that strategy? Quigley said as of the 1930s that the government was so overarmed that it's no longer like you could take up arms against your oppressor if your government became an oppressor. He said that was practical in 1776. The colonies could have the exact same armaments. You know, they could build ships, they could have cannons, they could do all this stuff, right? And today, the infrastructure of the global military-industrial complex is not such that you could take up any type of violent action against them effectively, right? So one asks, what was the benefit to those hijackers on 9/11, right? They drove themselves into buildings, allegedly, and then like millions of their people got killed. How's that work out? Like, how is that even an effective war strategy? But I digress.
What is the difference between individualism and collectivism?
Well, collectivism says the group is the authority, the group has the rights, and that you don't. You don't. So you and your free will and your ownership of your body, that's all subject to group approval. And, that's not a good thing historically. You can look up something called democide. That's a death by government. It's a University of Hawaii study. And it shows that like 300 million people in the 20th century died not during wars, but were killed as a function of their own government's policies. A lot of times the genocidal policies. So individualism is recognizing that you own your own body. You have to feed yourself, clothe yourself. Like, these are things you have to do for yourself. You have to think for yourself. You can't outsource these types of things. And it means that as a group of voluntary people, you have collective rights because all individuals have rights. But the moment that group thinks it's the originator of rights and the dictator of rights, the arbiter of rights, that's collectivism. Now, collectivism can come in many flavors. There's fascism, socialism, communism, a lot of isms. That's why I like to just talk about freedom and, slavery. That cuts it right there. Like, if you're telling somebody what to do, you're saying, I own you. I'm telling you what to do. You have to follow my orders. Well, that's like the military. There's a lot of things that do that. And that's a way of disciplining and controlling mass numbers of people. And there might be a time and place for that, but I always think it should be voluntary. There's a lot of that that's done in our lives that's involuntary. And that's one issue. But the fact that a lot of people don't even recognize the involuntary nature, that's kind of the issue I like to talk to. I feel like I could say some words and maybe do something about that, or they can do something about that in their own mind, right? I can let them know it's there and they can check it out for themselves. But until, so it's like Ross Ulbricht, he was held responsible in his case for actions that other people took. That is the absence of logic and reason. That is intellectual bankruptcy. It is. I could just as easily, under the same guise of logic, say that Jeff Bezos is responsible when people buy cyanide off of Amazon and kill themselves, or that Craig Newmark from Craigslist, that he's responsible when someone sells something. Like, Ross Ulbricht created the website, and he's got a double life sentence because people had a political agenda and decided he was guilty before the trial ever happened. Just like Philip Zelikow wrote the outline to the conclusions of the 9/11 Commission before they did their research.
What is the goldfish mentality?
Well, I'd tell you, but the people who need to hear that, we lost them in the first 6 seconds of this interview. And right now I'd just be preaching to the crowd. But it's it's when people can't hold their attention span. So the average attention span in new studies that are just out in the last couple of years it says it's like less than 6 seconds, which is less than a goldfish, which is how a goldfish can be content to swim around in like a soulless bowl of water that you just leave there, just like do, right? That's the mentality. You don't have a long enough memory to recall the abuse that's going on, right? So what I try to do with my media is undo that. So some of my productions, as you've seen and heard, are like 20 hours. And I've made movies that are like 8 hours. Like I try to stretch out people's attention and give them nutritious, fortifying knowledge, references, wisdom, links, all this stuff to things that exist. It's not about what I'm saying. It's about me pointing out all these things that exist to communicate to you so you can check them out for yourself. So that's the opposite of the goldfish mentality. If you look at the average duration of when people watch videos of mine on YouTube, like most people have a duration of, 30 seconds to 2 minutes on their videos. Mine's like 40 minutes, upwards of that sometimes. Like I made a 3.5 hour video with Bill Binney, and that accounted for like 32 million minutes of viewing time on my channel. Right? So like I don't have a lot of subscribers. When I publish something, it doesn't reach that many people, but most of the people are watching a big chunk of the content that I'm putting out. They're not just like clicking once and bouncing, right? So I don't give much weight to like view counts or thumbs up, because I'm not looking like for compliments. I just want to spread the knowledge that it is attainable, but it's not easy enough where everyone can just go find it on their own. That's where I think the specific value that I'm adding to the situation, that I've taken all these years to collect, a couple thousand books, all of which have these rare and insightful quotes that if the public just knew this, they wouldn't be letting XYZ go on out there right now, whether it's going into Syria or stop funding the Palestinians or taking away people's free speech or thinking that it's okay to like lead with violence and reason later. It's time to speak out while we still can, right? Because we live in a precarious time. We are afforded all this internet technology, but at the same time, there's a group of people out there that don't want to see ideas get bigger. They don't want to see their status quo evaporate because it's based on a bunch of bullshit. So they push back. They got big dollars.
Yeah. I wonder what people would think about invading Syria and Libya and all those places if they had heard either the Oded Yanan plan of the 1980s or if they had heard the Wesley Clark 7 countries in 5 years statement. Like, I really am curious, like, at what point people will deny information that's put in front of them.
Well, the government does such a good job of presenting their less than truthful side and their narrative. They know they're big on the narrative, right? That's why Corbett's conspiracy video was so insightful and ironic, because he's like, look, this is the official story. See how silly it sounds? Look at this other evidence that makes that sound even sillier. But there's not really an effective resistance against the government's propaganda. They're pretty good at it, and they got a lot of people repeating either one side or the other. They're very good at like getting here's the echo chamber for this, and here's the echo chamber for that, and we're just going to keep reason and logic and actual evidence out of both discussions and let you guys just fight with each other, because without all the evidence, you can't solve the problem anyway. And that's what national security does. That's what censorship does, right? They're saying we're gonna take this piece of the story out. And naturally, you're all going to try to figure out what's in that piece of the story, right? Like as an example, I live in Connecticut. We have a newspaper here called the Hartford Courant, and I think it's it's owned by different people today, but it was the New England Courant of Benjamin Franklin's day. Like he used to write for that newspaper. So the Hartford Courant, FOIA sends a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI, and they say, we'd like to know more about Sandy Hook. And the FBI sends back this document that is so redacted, like every line is basically blacked out. How do I know this? Because the people at the Hartford Courant put that on the front page. They're like, hey, the FBI, we asked the FBI questions. They gave us the middle finger. Here's the picture of the middle finger. The problem is most people don't understand what that means. What it means to me is if you black out all that information, it causes unnecessary speculation. It throws gasoline on any type of embers, and it throws a couple logs on there too, so it can burn for a long time, right? So national security and censorship and classification is consistently used to hide the parts of the story, right? Like they might have video of this Flight 77 flying into the Pentagon at this impossible angle where there would be no lift under the wings, and all these different things that, as a physician, looking at physics and looking at the physical evidence, you can't come up with the conclusion that the official story presents, right? So if they have that footage and they've hidden it to create people saying, oh, it was a missile, it was a plane, it was whatever, right? Then that's also on them, because they had the evidence. They could have cleared up the conversation. They could have prevented a bunch of people speculating, right? But they chose not to. That's called psychological warfare. When they have the truth and they don't present it to we, the taxpayers, and it causes issues out there, that's not, Wolfgang Halbig starting it. That's not these other people starting it. That's the people with the power to censor and classify and call national security. That's the origin of that action, that consequence, right? That causality. I think that goes left unsaid all too often.
Yeah, James Corbett had a great point when I was talking to him. He goes, yeah, here's all my questions about 9/11. By the way, it's not, the obligation isn't on me. It's not like you're walking up to a person and saying, when did you stop beating your wife? It's like you, the government, the social contract people who are there to protect us, so we delegate our rights to you, so you give them back to us. Sometimes it's like, you didn't protect us, now tell us what happened. And they can't even do that. Yeah. And the goldfish mentality question is the main reason I wanted to interview Richard, because I remember seeing an interview. The John Taylor Gatto interview just popped up on like my side feed. How long is that interview?
I think it's 5 hours. We filmed John over 2 days, and it's on 4 DVDs. I think it's a total of 4.5 or 5 hours. The ultimate history lesson.
So I saw that, and I just remember thinking there must be a lot of information if there's 5 hours. So just to check it out, I was just hooked, like right from the beginning. When right by your first question that I think is so clever. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to go watch it to find it out.
Hey, just real quick though, you know how that first question happened?
How?
It was total spontaneity, because I had a 50-page outline for John. I gave it to him the night before when I dropped him off at the hotel. We sit him down and he's like, Richard, if we had a week, we couldn't cover all of this. So I threw it aside. And then that logo was on the screen, and I was just like, boom. And then we talked for over that day and then continued the next day. So that was all like outline free. Because once you do all the research and make the outline, you as an interviewer, you've got it, dude. Now you can free flow and participate. And that's why it was a cool conversation, because I wasn't sitting there like, okay, question 38, there's a time and place for that, but it doesn't work well over 5 hours, Over 5 hours, it goes all over the place. It's unplanned. Like we're talking about, the history of the Illuminati or the history of the Prussian education system. And maybe these things aren't so far apart, and Washington and Jefferson. And what did they say about the Illuminati? And how does that fit in the, public schooling? And I don't know. It was a life experience for me. I'm glad that my buddies were able to help me film it and that it turned out as good as it did. Like that room was super hot. We didn't have air conditioning until like the day before we bought an air conditioner. Cause I'm like, John's like 80 years old. We need, it's hot in here. We need to buy an air conditioner for this room. So there were like a whole bunch of things that had to go on to make that happen. And it took me like 6 months to track him down to do that. So it's par for the course.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think there's also a 58-page transcript that I found on Scribd. And that was just so cool, just reading one sentence at a time, stopping, thinking, and researching for 10 minutes on each answer.
Did that have the links in it? Because we have one that has the there's 1,000 footnotes and links for that conversation. We used to give it away or sell it with the DVD set. We had some package where we did that. I don't know. I haven't focused on our store or any of that type of stuff in like a year. I have to go beef it up, make it a better presentation, because it's. I do such a poor job of I like to do what I do, and I don't spend any time or energy trying to market it or promote it and these types of things. And so it's been really grassroots and word of mouth, but I'm to the point where I've been doing this long enough where I need to take that more seriously. And if we have a great DVD set and a transcript that goes with it, that maybe I should make people a compelling offer and try to get that in more people's hands.
All right. How can someone differentiate between what is true and what is false?
Well, you can't do it by assuming. So I would compare and contrast. I would gather a lot of data. So let's use the Trivium method. Let's say I want to find out, is this Russian guy Khodorkovsky? He's a billionaire. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Why are all these people interested in him? So what I would do is I would go and I would Google search and I would pull up all these different articles from all these different perspectives, these outlets on this guy. New York Times, Washington Post, Intercept, any and all that's relevant. And so you start reading through there. So now you're gathering your independent pieces of data. He's a billionaire. He took over this oil company. He cut some deals in 2003 with Kissinger and Lord Rothschild, and then Putin puts him in prison. Okay, these are all pieces of information. It's not telling you the whole story yet. Why do we know about him? Why is he so then you start to put some of these things together. Biden and Obama sponsored a bill for him, Khodorkovsky, to get out of prison. That's pretty interesting. Why are two guys that became president and vice president interested in getting this Russian oligarch billionaire guy out of the cage that Putin put him in? And then once you start to look into that, it's like I did a search for Obama, Biden, and Khodorkovsky. And then there's like Joe Biden speaking at Moscow University. Like the Russians are bad, right? Obama and Biden, they're like strong allies over there. And they're speaking about how all these American companies, Boeing, all these big defense contractors are doing contracts in Russia. And if I put Trump's name on the speech, people would go AWOL, like ape shit. And they'd be like, look, it's total proof of collusion with the Russians. And I'm like, oh, sorry, this is Biden at Moscow University in Russia talking like this. So you start to understand it's like Khodorkovsky, good or bad, doesn't make a difference. But now you see what side he's on. He's on the side against Putin. He's on the side with Kissinger and Lord Rothschild and Biden and Obama. And now you've kind of like people are saying that Trump needs to be at war with Putin. And it's like, okay, these guys obviously have a grudge against Putin. That exists before Trump comes around. And then Trump just like that all just gets pushed onto him. It's really the Democrats who are so working with Russia and trying to push Putin out, get Khodorkovsky back in the mix of things, right? So you got to collect the individual pieces by asking the questions like, who is this guy? What has been printed about him? What can I learn? There's this guy, Lee Stranahan. He does reporting for Sputnik. That's where I first heard someone bring up his name. And then Lee's like, he's talking about these different articles. So I went and looked them up, and then I kept looking things up. So I took this thing that I heard, I went out, started looking it up, and I went beyond it to form like a semi-comprehensive understanding in a couple hours. It's something that's definitely relevant. And if I waited for someone to tell me to do that, I'd still be waiting. So part of freedom is being able to pursue your interests, to understand and learn what you want, and then to take that action into the real world. And maybe I create a piece of media and say, look at this. This sure puts a different spin on that conversation. And then that's how people can tell they're being lied to, because they just saw something that's much more believable, relevant, and verifiable than the thing they had. So it goes back to, I quote this Gandhi quote all the time. I should really figure out if he really said it. I would imagine he said it in a newspaper article after they got beat up, but it's basically the notion of, if you're experiencing injustice, then the only way to stop that is to make it visible to others. And it was only once people got pictures of the Indians getting beat up by the British who were colonizing their country. Once those pictures of the British being so brutal were circulated, then there's a public outcry for that to be stopped, right? So that's what a lot of us are doing today with the ability to publish media is, you're not going to get justice for USS Liberty unless you do something to make it visible. So when I have the opportunity to interview somebody who survived that attack, yeah, I'll spend a whole day and I'll spend a month. I'll spend a whole day filming and a month editing that footage, because I know for the next however many years, people can look at that and hear that guy in his own words, uncensored, tell you in a variety of ways how it was not an accident and could not be construed as an accident. That matters, I think. That matters a lot more than anything I did in the corporate world back in the day.
That is a great point you made about making injustice visible. Like in my head, I can think it's like you can say, all right, Hiroshima was a much more immoral, greater crime than Waco. But I get so pissed off over Waco to the extent that it's like 80 innocent people versus 100,000 innocent people. But because one's on camera, I'm so much more emotionally attached. And it was the same thing with I was advocating liberal progressivism at one point, and heard Adam Kokesh say, government is violence. Every law it makes is an initiation of violence. And I'm like, not real. No. And then I stopped thinking about it. And then to see Adam Kokesh smoking a joint and then people walking up to him and kidnapping him as he's resisting, basically, it's like, wow, that is violence. It took me that to really understand that principle. So that was a great point you made about the Gandhi reference.
Well, and that's it's like the same line of thinking that leads to the creation of a shirt like this, right?
Yeah.
Lynn had you've seen the gray shirts that they made for Free Ross. And then I asked my graphics guy, I said, look, I want a shirt to sell to the audience that says everything, right? Free Ross. If Ross isn't free, neither are we. And then the chains in the American flag, which is upside down because we're in distress, are made out of ones and zeros, right? So it's like the cyber crime. Here he is behind bars. And then on the back, it has like the whole history of how he got put in prison. That's something I can do to make it visible, And even though, there's only a couple people who actually get to see the shirt or whatever, because I don't travel all over the world or nothing, but I go to the post office or I run an errand. Somebody in line behind me is getting a little education, right? So it's not about trying to make it's not about making a product. It's about passing a message. And to pass the message effectively for this, I had it put on a t-shirt and I had my graphics guy, Greg, I described in words. I was like, here's what I'm looking for. And then he's like, here you go. So it takes a bunch of people to even when you're making a film or something like that, you're talking about many people getting together to make it visible. When I interviewed Gatto or Benny or any of these other bigger interviews, I've got several friends who help me. And they don't help me because they're like professional, this is what they do. They help me because they're like, well, who else is going to help Rich? And we all learn what we need to do the job that day. And they're all, smart, super nice, intelligent people. Sorry about that, dude. And those are real life moments, man. You're getting together with your friends, you're doing something substantial, and it shines a light on injustice long term. That's something I'm down for doing, and I like hanging with my friends who like to do that. Although I'd prefer, would we hang together or we hang separately? What's the quote from the Revolutionary War? Like either we hang together or we're going to hang separately. But, today I think it's a whole different threat. We're not worried about the British coming to our house in the middle of the night with a torch and a pitchfork and stringing us up in a tree. I think the more real thing today is you say something that someone else doesn't like, and that person wants to, instead of engage you in a reasonable and logical manner, they just say, shut that person off. Take away their ability to buy and sell. Cut them off from society. Like that's what they do these days, right? It's kind of a passive aggressive type thing. I don't know. I still like presenting ideas and getting feedback and learning every day and continuing to grow. And I think a lot of the people who engage in the Schadenfreude or taking pleasure from seeing other people's pain on these social networks, they're stagnant. They're not growing. They're not challenging their minds. They think they already know. And like I said, I think that's one of the greatest threats to freedom that there is or ever will be. Because those types of things created nuclear weapons and all these other things, you want to say that Islamo-terrorism's effect? Ignorance created that. Ignorance supported and groomed and trained and armed and facilitated and covered that up. So...
I was watching a Stefan Molyneux video so long ago. It was when he still had the red background. And he was talking about the G20 summit in which anarchists, communists, were actually, throwing Molotov cocktails and breaking windows and doing all this stuff. And he pulls up an article from the Denver Post, and he quotes from a different summit saying that there were actually police officers undercover that claimed to be anarchists and were actually infiltrating the organization. COINTELPRO is another example. I think he cites in that
COINTELPRO, Operation Mockingbird. That's been going on a long time.
But that was the first time I had ever heard of that, and I was blown away. I'm like, the police are infiltrating the group, but the group is what they're supposed to keep us from, and they're actually the ones creating the chaos. And Molyneux mentions the term false flag, and I had never heard it at the time. So what is a false flag, and what are some proven false flags throughout history?
Well, the Battle in Seattle is what the movie was titled, about the 1999 World Trade Organization's, there's people protesting it, and then they take some anarcho-communists who are happy to create mischief and calamity, and they're kind of under the working with the established authorities to disrupt and discredit any legitimate protest. This is something that comes out of a playbook by a guy named Gene Sharp, who wrote it for the United States government to overthrow other countries. And since that WTO in 1999, there has been an ever-increasing prominence of Gene Sharp's strategies for creating revolutionary chaos among indigenous people of a country. And that ties in, so that's a type of false flag. People who are acting under the guise of another group of which they're not a part. They're wearing a costume. So it's like if police dress up like Antifa, or Antifa dress up like police and carry out an event. The classic example would be the Boston Tea Party. These guys from the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, they dress up like indigenous Native Americans. They commit this acts of destruction to the East India Company's tea chests, which on the other side of the world are being traded for opium and things like this, right? And then that's 1773. So the British first see it as Native Americans attacking their ship, which gives them pause, because if it was just the colonials, they'd be like, oh, those are a bunch of colonials, let's get them. But the British were afraid of the Native American Indians and tomahawks and getting scalped and all these sort of things that they might have thought of at the time. So going forward, another historical example would be 1898, how America gets into the Spanish-American War, where the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor was used as the casus belli, the reason to go to war. In all likelihood, it was blown up on purpose. And there's even some interesting William Randolph Hearst quotes about this. How there's no war in Cuba, and he says, you bring me I'll bring you the war, you bring me the story. These sort of quotes. So 1898, and then 1917 with the Lusitania in World War I, Pearl Harbor in World War II, where you have a group who wants America to get into World War II, and America was being very isolationist and had laws preventing us from helping countries that were already at war. And, when you look at it from a military standpoint, the new fleet is out. What got destroyed at Pearl Harbor were the older fleet, the older ships. It wasn't the new aircraft carriers. It wasn't. So there's, because if our enemy is going to get us under attack like that, they want to keep some of the good ships so we can fight on their side. So it wasn't an attempt to destroy, but it's an attempt to provoke. And when you understand how we were provoked into that war, it's not that different from World War I. You can go to the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam War. That's how we get into Vietnam. An alleged attack on, the USS Pueblo. And then years later, Secretary of Defense McNamara says famously in Errol Morris's movie that it never happened, that it was a mistake. Sorry, it never didn't happen. So false flags have played an important part in military history for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And people who speak as if a false flag is not a useful military tactic are people that are obviously ignorant of any sort of martial education.
I know these aren't false flags, but can you explain the 1991 babies in incubators incident?
Well, that is, it would be in the false flag chapter of a book. That's where the United States sought a compelling reason to present to the American people so that the American people would back invading Iraq. And so they had a PR company, and the PR company is known, and you can go read all about this. Just type in babies with incubators PR company. And you're going to see that they took like the daughter of the Saudi American ambassador to Saudi Arabia, or I forget what her exact status was, but she was not a nurse from a Kuwaiti hospital. So the Kuwaiti hospital story starts with this girl who's part of the political fray being used as an actress in front of a congressional hearing where she testifies that Saddam's men took all these inhumane actions on these babies in incubators and stomped in their heads. And it's the type of things that are totally atrocious and triggering to any sane human being. You'd be like, let's fuck that guy up. Right. However, the story's not true. And by the way, if Saddam's such a monster, you'd think they wouldn't have to make stuff up. Now, I'm not defending Saddam Hussein. The American CIA put him in the power because he was a ruthless tyrant who would engage in whatever, and the British were like, he's our guy. Let's, put him to work. So like I said, there's a lot more nuance to it, but I think it's disingenuous to all the people who fight and die during these conflicts, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, ongoing wars today, to sit here and be like, well, our government's as clean as the driven snow and there's nothing going on there, and it's just conspiracy theory and easy. People want to think these. No, dude. No. I don't want to think these things. Unfortunately, I find a lot of this evidence laying around that you guys don't sweep up and keep under the carpet, I guess. It's everywhere. JFK, RFK, MLK. MLK was shot by our government. They had a trial that proved this. And yet people were like, that's conspiracy theory. I'm sorry if thinking hurts your brain, but that's the truth.
So a lot of things there. You mentioned there were laws that stopped us from funding other countries in war. There's a great book by General Major Jordan Racy Jordan called the Major Jordan's Diaries.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Where he talks about the Lend-Lease operation. Right.
This is reflected in that the new Churchill movie with Gary Oldman, The Darkest Hour.
That was the shittiest movie I've ever seen.
And possibly the best acting performance of Gary Oldman's life. It's a shame it was such a propagandized movie because like Churchill's like, oh, FDR, please help us. And it's like, wait a minute, dude. These guys are cousins in reality. FDR is related to Churchill through Henry Howland. And I have a buddy who's done the genealogical research on that. I was like, well, that's interesting. Did they know that they were cousins at the time? Does it matter? And then it's like, where did FDR come from? He comes from the opium smuggling Delanos and the Roosevelts in this Eastern establishment that's very close to the British East India Company anyway, right? So there's this thing that's left out that it was already agreed upon when Cecil Rhodes died, that America and Britain, we were going to merge and take on the world and be a superpower, new world order, right? That was already like done deal. So World War I and World War II, the actual stories are our government's like, hey, how can we get into this? And their government's like, here's how you can do it, right? Now in the movie, they're going to be like, oh, we can't give you guys the ships and the planes that you already paid for. We'll put them near the border and you can hook up some horses and some goats to it and you can pull it across the border, Churchill. And I was just like, this is, unless there's a tape of that conversation, I doubt it ever happened. But if there was a tape, it would be at GCHQ's headquarters. They probably do have a tape of that conversation. Maybe that's why they wrote it like that. it makes it look like, oh, the British were like so weak and we had to go in and help them out, and we were kind of bullyish and we didn't want to help them out. We're going to take advantage of them. It's at least an equal story. If not, we were being taken advantage of by our older cousins, the British, who were much more experienced in playing the great game of espionage and running double and triple agents, things that would never have even occurred to Americans, right? Because we had not we, but American colonists had an intelligence agency, for lack of a better term. George Washington was a spy master. He ran spies. What were they doing? They're spying on the British. Who were they protecting themselves from using encryption? The British, right? There's a book. It's published by National Geographic. You can read all about it, right? After that, though, there's not much work for American intelligence agents. Like, there's no spying going on until, like, most notably the Civil War. The Confederates set up their agency. The Union has their secret service. They're all around Lincoln as he's getting killed. This is all very interesting stuff. After that, though, no standing secret service, not secret service, but CIA, FBI, none of that stuff comes around until like the 20s for the FBI. And that comes out of trying to ban and prohibit opium and stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff before FBI that's interesting. But then CIA comes from OSS, which is a wartime World War II faction. MI6 is much older. GCHQ, much older than the nascent American intelligence agencies. So the Darkest Hour movie is like, America went from 0 to 100 in intelligence in like 0 time. And the British were just like always nipping at our heels trying to catch us, which is not the truth. That's not the truth. They were more advanced. And they cracked the Enigma code for, there's a variety of ways that they did that. The help of the Polish. There's a whole bunch of things that went on. But still, they kept it secret, and they let Americans and all these other people from these countries die because they're like, well, if we told this ship that they're in harm's way, they would know we broke their code, so we can't do that. It's like, come on now. That's a different mentality than Americans have in that situation, I think, traditionally. But I can only speak for myself. That's how I see it.
And Churchill and Roosevelt were also both, I think, Lord Admiralties in the First World War. So it's like they're teaming up. They're getting us twice. It's like, well, we didn't catch them the first time, so they just played it through again.
Right before I saw Darkest Hour, I read this really good book. It's called Friendly Fire. It has a picture of Churchill on the front with a machine gun, and it's subtitled The Secret War Between the Allies. Now, it's not an American book. I don't think it's written by American authors. I'm pretty sure it's written by British authors. So this is a critical view of one of their biggest popular heroes. And I found a lot of veracity to it, and how the way that Churchill became prime minister is because of his knowledge and knowing FDR from like 1919, probably during Versailles and the peace treaty back then. That's where the Dulles brothers get their break. There's a lot of things that go on there. And that, so it's with American help that Churchill becomes prime minister over there. But that's Anglo-American help. It's not like people in America and American values. It's people who are living here in America and are still sucking at the tit of the opium monopoly, which continues. It never ended. That's why I would introduce a book like Dope Inc., Britain's Opium War on the World. And it says that the Dope Inc. monopoly was handed down from the East India Company to Kissinger Associates. And Kissinger Associates, you had that guy, L. Paul Bremer. He's a Kissinger partner who was in charge of Iraq, and he was Marshall McLennan on 9/11. He says Osama bin Laden attacked us, and the first guy they tried to bring in for the 9/11 commission was Kissinger. So if these guys are cover-up artists and they put their own people in charge of their own operations they investigate, then that would tell a very different story than the official story. And I think there's a lot more veracity to that story in detail. But
yeah, Pat Buchanan in his book, The Unnecessary War, Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War, he talks about how Churchill came to power. The PR firm you mentioned, Hill and Knowlton, I think is the name, if that's correct.
That is absolutely correct.
The babies in incubators thing is interesting because there's a babies on bayonets lie from World War I that the Bryce report pushed, saying that the
if
Germans
it ain't broke, don't
came into
fix it.
Belgium.
Yeah, right. So they, right, and so you really don't see this type of propaganda in American culture until World War I, and it had to be conducted because I think 30% of American population at the time of World War I were either from Germany or had relatives in Germany. There's a large, even still German-speaking population at that time. And so what they had to do is they had to come out, they had to convince, they're like, we need to convince these people that the people back there are even worse, and they're not to be supported. So they came up with these Hun cartoons where they would have Germans doing all these atrocities, and it's shown in cartoon form, makes it out in a newspaper, and then makes it out into the country. Someone rips it out and shows the people, and they get all in an uproar about it. And that's how you get popular demand from people who are just from that country, but they're like, well, we're not there anymore. We don't know. Those guys are bloodthirsty, ruthless killers. There's just so much to it. It's but it can't all what I'm trying to do is get more people to read and to read some books that are off the beaten path, that have a lot of validity and value in them, because it's impossible for me to communicate all the knowledge that I come across through the reading. Right. So I'm trying to, as I learn things, I might've read 40 or 50 books on British intelligence, Ian Fleming, all their propaganda, psychological warfare, all World War I, World War II, all these types of involvement. And then to explain it to people, you have to make something that takes more than 6 seconds, right? So you're already up against the challenge of, if you want to know this story, your mental RAM isn't prepared to take it in, right? So by creating long form content, I help the audience exercise their ability to concentrate longer than 6 seconds, to improve their attention span so they could actually comprehend a story that's so big and so massive that it's that way on purpose. That's why they shrink down our thinking through schooling. They want us to have a really small mindset so you can't actually load the actual high definition view of what's going on.
According to John Pilger in the Iraq-Iran war, I just want to finish up on that baby and incubator thing. Pilger says that the CIA first hired Saddam as an assassin. Saddam goes to jail. The U.S. government then supports Saddam against the war in Iran. He then asked Douglas Feith some years later about the slant drilling that was going on between Kuwait and Iraq, to which Pilger gives that sort of famous response. He goes, the U.S. doesn't kill civilians. And he goes, the U.S. doesn't kill civilians? He goes, no, the U.S. doesn't target civilians. Now, Madeleine Albright was then interviewed on 60 Minutes, and she was asked, these sanctions, according to the UN, the sanctions the U.S. put on Iraq after the 91 Gulf War have killed, according to some estimates, 500,000, children. That's more than Hiroshima. Was the price worth it? And Madeleine Albright says, it's a tough call to make, but yeah, we think it was worth it. So it's not just we're being lied to, you're getting played, don't get played. It's actual really immoral things come about when as a result of ignorance, which is why I loved Richard's first answer to the question what the greatest threat to freedom is. All right, I promise I'll stop talking about the Gulf War after this. Any final thoughts on that?
No, it's a good learning experience. If you want to understand American foreign policy, that's an excellent example to get yourself familiar. Then go into Gulf War illness and depleted uranium and white phosphorus. There's a lot you can learn about our humanity or lack thereof. And a lot of people say, well, I don't want to focus on that stuff, but our taxpayer dollars fund all that stuff. And I feel like if I didn't pay taxes, I would be put in a cage. So as long as I have to pay taxes to not be put in a cage, and you guys are going to misappropriate my money to use it in worse ways than I could ever dream of using it myself, then I'm going to say something about it. Then that's I'm paying so I can speak freely then, right? And I guess that's where I see it right now. We live in a place where it's not like I could just be like, this doesn't make any sense and I think it's theft. they aren't basing their decisions on logic and reason. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this structure of taxes in the first place. Like I saw a good meme by The Art of Not Being Governed the other day, and it was like 1913. Here's streets and companies and cars and all this stuff, and we had all this stuff, and we didn't need everyone to be taxed, right? But what we didn't have back then, by the way, was a standing army that took over 50% of the national budget every year. We've only had this standing army budget problem that requires taxes since we got back in bed with the British Empire. Period.
And Scott Horton, in his book Fool's Errand, makes a great case that a standing army makes you less safe and can make you subject to the CIA term blowback.
I'm all for people being trained, capable, ready, self-reliant, self-sufficient, voluntary. I just don't think that doing it in the involuntary way of funding and staffing and aggressing and does anything to help America. It might help the United States corporate government, or however they want to see it, merged with tech society and defense contractors and media establishment, whatever you want to call that, globalism, new world order. But it doesn't help the average person that any of us interact with every day. It doesn't help us, doesn't help them. Why are we doing it? There must be another reason. It's very popular. UK and the United States are like the two biggest arms dealers in the world, but you don't have the right to defend yourself. Well, if you can't think for yourself, you're definitely not going to defend yourself. That's what they're doing. They couldn't like attack us like and militarily conquer us. So they went around the other way. They're like, we'll just keep dumbing them down until they don't even know what freedom is. And we're just about there, man. You look at your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed or any of that stuff from day to day. We're almost there.
It's pretty sad that Trump will tweet something like, 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Then he becomes president and then sells like $100 billion to Saudi Arabia. Or they'll be like, Al-Qaeda did 9/11. And then they'll arm Al-Qaeda elements. And Rand Paul will even say, hey, let's not arm Al-Qaeda just to fight either Gaddafi or Assad. Now, I want to talk about hidden in plain sight sort of thing. So I, went through all of school. I had never heard, I was actually raised Jewish. I went to temple. And I had never heard of things like the bombing of the King David Hotel, the Levon Affair, or the USS Liberty of 1967. And I had never heard of an important letter Abraham Lincoln wrote to Horace Greeley saying, it doesn't really bother me if slavery exists, doesn't exist. I just want to save the Union. And I had been told we lost 600,000 people for the moral virtue of stopping slavery. I'm curious how you think secrets and conspiracies are kept from the public.
They're kept from the public systematically through many, many centuries of practice. Like Machiavelli, he wrote a whole chapter on how useful conspiracy is to gaining power. Like it's a tool in the war chest. So, the way that power perpetuates is through keeping itself secret. Otherwise, people would rise and give resistance to it. So that's their whole deal. And it's only a shocking quote from Lincoln if you're told that we fought this, like the Union fought the South to end slavery, right? The only reason that there were slaves in this country in the first place is because we were a British colony. When the French were here, they were getting along with the Indians. There was no massive genocide. It's only once the British start coming here and asserting that the king has property rights in this country. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on, but it's always left out of the conversation. And that to me makes things really boring, uninteresting, unrewarding, unuseful as knowledge to pass off to other people. So yes, slavery is wrong, but slavery didn't end after the Civil War. Slavery goes on today. The Chinese, after they did the communist experiment and Mao killed like 50 million of their people, they're like, we'll sacrifice a couple more generations to slavery. We'll suck all the Western technology and productivity over here. We'll take away their job markets because our people are slaves. And then we can send all our people to live in those countries because we can buy everything pennies on the dollar. So it's the willingness of another nation to enslave their own people and have Foxconn Apple factories for all this Western technology. If we thought slavery was wrong in this country, we would never have let Google and Apple and GM and whoever else move all the way over there because of artificial tariffs and taxes, tax breaks and all this stuff, right? Because by going and doing business in China, you have to adopt the China communist state censorship and all that other stuff. And now that's rolling back to America. Why? Because everyone had to have the next iPhone that's made by slaves, just like the Nikes, made by slaves, right? I don't find that very rewarding, but I find that I don't really have any options. You know any non-slave made type of mobile phones out there, dude?
None that come to mind, but I haven't researched it.
Yeah. So it's like part of the precariousness of being born into this ongoing story. Much of the story is hidden to start with. It's already going on. Like, what's going on with the American Middle East policy today? It just didn't come out of nowhere. It's been going on. There's been a historical evolution of that for a couple hundred years. So you can catch up on the story, how the British fought a first, second, and third Anglo-Afghan war in that territory to control the opium and heroin and stuff like that. And now that answer is, why are American troops guarding the heroin and the opium crops over there? Now you have an answer. Oh, you get it. Oh, we don't really control our troops. Our troops are out there serving the agenda of another national organization. That's cool. But that's what it is. And if we're going to be adults, we should talk about it as it is, not how we wish it should be, unless we're talking about how to solve it. Like, I wish that wasn't going on.
One of the most unbelievable conversations I had was with a guy who I said, there is a great amount of evidence that the U.S. is actually guarding the opium fields in Afghanistan. And he just had such a laugh right in my face. He goes, "You stupid moron. Don't you think we'd know about this if it were true?" And I just said, I'm curious. What do you think about this? And I looked up the Geraldo Rivera Fox News segment that's done on the U.S. troops guarding the opium fields. And he literally started crying. And that was such a moment for me.
That's an appropriate reaction.
To see someone go from, the troops are there, we support them, they're just there for freedom. Heroin's illegal here, so they know that's immoral to do. They wouldn't go over there and do it. It was such a transformation for me that I just wanted to share it with my audience.
Well, and it's indicative of the fact that we have an ally who deemed it completely appropriate to have a business plan to hook a whole bunch of people in Asia on opium, to forcefully trade with these people, to take advantage of them. There would be no Hong Kong today. Hong Kong was one of these opium ports that the British had, a little island off the shore, and they could do their opium trading. And that's where Hong Kong Shanghai Bank was formed, which today is still one of the largest drug money laundering banks in the world ever. And it does business in this country illegally, and it gets fined by our government and pays billions in fines, and those fines go missing. So that just gives you, that's outside of your political science education, for sure. That's actually how things go on. And I find the study of how things go on in reality much more educational than anything I was ever presented in the schooling system, because the schooling system is there to make you think like everyone else. It's not there to teach you the truth or how to live a life that can be prosperous and happy and free.
Yeah, that's what blew me away about the John Taylor Gatto interview. By the way, final word on slavery. The draft is so obviously slavery that the fact that it lasted until 1970 something is just total evidence that it wasn't fought on principle.
And they'll bring it back when they need it.
Yeah, that's what Charlie Rangel said. That's what Rahm Emanuel said. But don't worry, they've changed the word from slavery to draft to mandatory public service. So the word was changed. I'll give him credit there.
All right, so here's what I hear. I hear you say Rahm Emanuel, and my brain says, hey, Rahm Emanuel's dad was he part of the Haganah that did the attack on the King David Hotel?
Part of Irgun.
Irgun. IRGUN, right? Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because Rahm Emanuel, he's in charge of Chicago. Like, he used to be Obama's chief of staff, and then he became mayor of Chicago. And his brother is a doctor, and he has a couple other brothers. So one of them's a Rhodes Scholar. I think that's Ezekiel. And then I was like, oh, who's their dad? Oh, their dad was part of this Israeli resistance group against the British, who had kind of set up the proto country until 1947, when Israel was recognized by the United Nations. And as part of that struggle, Rahm Emanuel's father participated in the bombing of a British hotel, the King David Hotel. Now, do you know the story too? Am I recalling it accurately?
Yeah. What was it? 1946, 48?
I was thinking it was like 46 or 40, like early 47. But I remember learning about that. I put it in the history blueprint. And I think another thing I learned, Rahm Emanuel, I think he has a ballet degree. I'm pretty sure he has a ballet degree. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just thought it was interesting. Just interesting, that's all.
Yeah, this gets to the heart of, what I like so much about tragedyandhope.com is I had always learned history was like this dumb, boring thing. Like, you want to know history? Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492.
Yeah, all right, now write that version of a story sanitized. It's sanitized. That's why it's not interesting when we're taught things like that in school, because they're telling you sentence by sentence, declaratively, here's what happened. It's not like saying, hey, I want you to go to the library this weekend, and I want you to tell me why the Boston Tea Party happened, or why America started, how the revolution started. And you'd be in the library, you'd see newspaper articles, you'd see magazines, you'd see books, you might meet some other people there, and they'd be like, my great-grandfather, you'd collect data from a bunch of different sources, then you'd kind of come up with an information, and then you'd compare it with other people in your class. Like, that would be actual learning. They don't want to give people that freedom. You might discover aspects of the story that they don't want you to talk about. I mean, they've already had to go through this trouble of manufacturing this phrase called conspiracy theory and having the CIA issue a memo, 1035-960, concerning questions of the Warren Commission report to critique Ed Epstein's book, which questions the methodology used by the Warren Commission to come up with their conclusions. They said, this guy's so dangerous. Ed Epstein's a New York Times bestselling author, now graduated Cornell. He used to be John Taylor Gatto's roommate back in the day when Kennedy was assassinated. So this is a big story. And to just say, let's dismiss any legitimate questions about this Warren Commission by just saying conspiracy theory, we'll repeat that a whole bunch. And then people who aren't so smart, when they can't handle these questions that people have, they can just say conspiracy theory and hope that ends their questions, because it's uncomfortable to think. That's kind of how I see it.
Ayn Rand wrote a great essay on this called The Argument from Intimidation. It's anything that shows disapproval. Conspiracy theorist, extremist, radical, far left, far right, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's such a great essay because it just shows that when someone calls you, that's a conspiracy theory, it's like, that is not an argument. To quote Stefan Molyneux, it's so obviously not a valid response that the fact that I ever thought it was is just unbelievable. Speaking of really making the case, there's a great part in your John Taylor Gatto interview where he makes a claim and then says, by the way, don't let anyone say something that important without citing their source. And I'm like, I had never heard that. I'd watched hours of MSNBC, CNN, and Fox by that time, and I had never heard someone say, now, hold on, let me hold myself accountable and explain. He then cites two committees, the Reese Committee and the Cox Committee. Can you tell us why those are of importance?
The Cox Committee, I believe, came first, and then it ran into some roadblocks, and it was reformulated into the Reese Committee. The primary whistleblower source is a guy named Norman Dodd, who was Yale educated, worked on Wall Street at JP Morgan, very smart guy. He was selected by Congress to investigate America's nonprofit foundations, namely the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. And what he found was that these organizations had as a goal that they discussed at their meetings year after year how to subvert the American political system, how to take over the statecraft of America to determine its foreign policy and get us into war. After we got out of war, how to maintain the wartime economy as if we were at war, how to dumb down the population such that they would, not notice the difference between capitalism and communism, and that the population of America could be comfortably merged with Soviet China or Soviet Union and communist China. All sorts of horrific things were investigated in the Reese Committee. And there you can get the reports. You can read a book by one of the other lawyers that was part of the Reese Committee. His name was Renee Wormser. So there's a lot that goes into it, but what it shows is that the robber barons, the people who were internationalists, the people who were in the Anglo-American establishment, this loyalty to the British Empire's opium monopoly, sought to undermine the sovereignty and the freedom-loving nature of America and use it as a tool to invade other countries and make them capitulate to globalist policies.
Who do you think are the most important whistleblowers that you've done research on?
Well, speaking more recently, in the last 100 years, I'd say Norman Dodd is there because he's the whistleblower on the education system and these nonprofit foundations that have. I mean, those are the same foundations that funded the CIA's work in MK Ultra and overthrowing these countries. They are part of the supranational government. You can always tell that because they don't pay taxes. Those people that can give away their billions and still have billions of dollars because they didn't really give it away. They just created a corporate name that says nonprofit, that sort of thing. Those people have the influence over nation states governments. So that's part of that level. As far as recent surveillance and taking away of Americans' rights, I'd put Bill Binney up there with Thomas Drake and Kirk Wiebe and Edward Snowden, these sorts of people. I don't know. I think there's a lot of important whistleblowers out there, and that we would know about more of them if the world wasn't set up to persecute whistleblowers to try to maintain the status quo because it's inconvenient to the people who hold political power.
There was a PolitiFact article that verified the claim by Jake Tapper, credit where credit's due, that Obama has, that during the Obama presidency, persecuted more journalists and whistleblowers than all other presidents combined. And I just remember thinking, I really was a big supporter of Obama when I first started getting into politics, and just thinking Jesus, I've been played. Just when I heard something like that, would you consider Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt a whistleblower?
Oh, sure. Charlotte Iserbyt and John Taylor Gatto, two of the top whistleblowers aside from Norman Dodd. I mean, Norman Dodd was blowing the whistle on the foundations, and Gatto and Iserbyt are blowing the whistles on the school system itself being turned and weaponized against children in America, and that this system is copied in many other countries around the world. And John and I discussed the origins and evolution of that in the Ultimate History lesson. Charlotte and I talk about that in episode 22 of the history through college. You wouldn't go through college to get to success. You just go to success. But everyone wants to be if you want success, you got to go through college to get there. Well, that's obviously not true. Same with everything else that you've been told. So if you want a successful, prosperous, happy, free life where you're experiencing and living in a state of freedom, you're not going to find that through the prescriptive process of brainwashing and soul sucking that they have set up for 15,000 hours. You probably won't survive it too well. And if you do, you'll be ripe for falling for an Obama or a George W. Bush or whoever else, Al Gore, Bill Clinton, what have you, Jimmy Carter. It's all the same thing, man. So you've gone through an important point of maturing where you've already realized that the given answers in this multiple choice are all bullshit, and that freedom exists by going beyond these options. Those options are there to limit us, not to help us expand our consciousness.
Who do you think are the most important researchers you've come across?
Well, I would put Carol Quigley on that list, Professor Anthony Sutton on that list. And there's other people that have singular books and not like Sutton and Quigley have multiple books where they're talking about these subjects. Any book that I've read that presents a verifiable missing, neglected aspect on a certain topic of history, I consider that just as essential as somebody who summarizes all those missing pieces. So I could give you a pretty long list. But it's not, again, people want to say, well, I don't have time to read, books for 10 years. Give me the gist. The gist would be you read a book like Tragedy and Hope 101 by Joe Plummer, or you read a book like The New World Order by Sean Stone, who wrote that as his thesis for his history degree at Princeton. And I wrote the foreword for that. I give an introduction to it, if you will. It's a pretty weighty topic that I thought he did a job, like he did an unassailable job. You can't look at that and be like, pick it apart. Be like, no, everything he's talking about in that story, that's verifiable because I knew it before I read his story. You mentioned
Anthony Sutton, and this, frankly, is one of the things that really pisses me off when I hear the term conspiracy theorist. It's like, you guys just have these theories. You just think like maybe this is connected to this. And then I read a book like America's Secret Establishment when it's literally primary documents are being shown to me, or I'm reading Day of Deceit where it's literally primary documents. You're the morons with the theory saying, I have a feeling the UN is there to keep us safe, and I have a feeling the government protects us from terrorists and that they don't fund them. I'm curious what you think were the great contributions of Anthony Sutton.
Well, he wrote several books. So he wrote a book on the Federal Reserve. He wrote a book on gold. He wrote a book on Skull and Bones. He wrote a book on the Soviets and Wall Street, the Germans and Wall Street, FDR and Wall Street. He wrote books on Soviet technology and how it came from Western, like Soviet development from Western technology. That was his big, his first 3 books that kind of got him on his way. But Professor Sutton, he's part of the Herbert Hoover Institute for International Peace, Stanford University's Hoover Institute, very prestigious place. Until he starts writing about the truth of how some of these things actually happened. Then they said, hey, that's outside of our storyline and our narrative, and we're going to let you get fired here, right? So Sutton's an interesting character because he's a very smart guy. He worked in the establishment, and then he bumped up against the thing that was oppressing us. Like, he worked with people from the Trilateral Commission who knew way better than him, and he's like, hey, I'm discovering this thing about the Trilateral Commission. And they're like, dude, my name's David Packard, and we're part of the, that's how it works here at, Stanford Hoover Institute. So he gets fired. His books are highly descriptive of how Western, specifically like European, American, British bankers were helping the Soviet Union's development, helping Hitler's development, helping FDR and the British Empire to fight these developments that they were creating. His book on Skull and Bones, that evidence comes directly from Charlotte Iserbyt. I don't know if you knew that, but her dad... Let's see, how did it work? Her dad was in Skull and Bones. Her grandfather helped Cecil Rhodes in like the gold fields of South Africa because he was like a Canadian mining engineer or something like that was down there. And she comes into possession of these Skull and Bones documents because her dad was ill and was dying, and then she didn't know what to do with them. So she calls Anthony Sutton, and he's like, oh, I know what to do with these. And he wrote a book. Now, I'm going from memory here, but there was a chapter in Sutton's book, which is titled America's Secret Establishment, An Introduction to Skull and Bones. There's a chapter in there called Chapter 8, How the Order Controls Education. I did not know that this was Chapter 8 in that book. I had seen it referenced before Sutton wrote that book. And so I just saw it as a pamphlet that Sutton produced called How the Order, which is Skull and Bones, 322, Controls American Education. So I spent $80 to get the pamphlet years and years ago. And then imagine my chagrin when I find out that that pamphlet is like chapter 8 in a book for $10 I can get later, right? So I got, just like my George Soros pamphlet, I've got some very expensive pamphlets that you could probably get. Like I scanned that, so I have a PDF of the George Soros thing. I don't have to take it out of the frame anymore to look at it. But there are these interesting little pamphlets. These are little artifacts of history that I think are much more interesting than anything in any textbook from any school or university on the planet.
Another great work that confirms, or I think uses Sutton's sources, is East minus West equals 0. I do talk about Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt and Anthony Sutton in my interview with Alex Newman, for those of you who want to check that out. And the skull and bones thing is so important. When you look at, like, what are Trump's connections to Russia? Is he being influenced by Russians, not in service of the American people? And it's like, we had 2 Skull and Bones members run against each other in 2004, and Tim Russert mentioned it, and no one else did. Okay, I think there was a caller on C-SPAN who also mentioned it. But it's so pathetic when you just step back and look at something like this.
The Eastern establishment of America, those families participated in the opium trade. They made a lot of money. They put money in and built out and, fortified Harvard and Yale. So a lot of the big buildings and these things you see are from the era of opium money. The founding members of Skull and Bones have strong ties to the Russell Trust and the Russell Company, which were opium smugglers. So a lot of people say one of the co-founders of Skull and Bones was opium money, and it's actually his cousin, but it's not that far removed. And the money does come from Russell and Company and opium. And there's like records of this stuff, right? So from back in the 1840s, 1850s, when Skull and Bones, this German secret society, takes root at this Anglo-American university type place, like an Oxford of America. That's what Yale is. This secret society then hosts a whole bunch of people who later become famous presidents and vice presidents, secretaries of state, and all these other high-ranking positions, right? So there's definitely something there that's part of the training aspect of the ruling class that's like handed down from Oxford, right? But it's not the totality of it. And so you can't just be like, here's a list of Skull and Bones people, and these are the people that run the world, any more than you can say, here's a list of Rhodes Scholars, and these people run the world. It's like, it's all of the above. They're all working on it. They're all on the same page, as it were. They think they're better than the rest of us, that they deserve to rule over us, that they deserve to control our lives and make all these other forms of legislation to limit our freedom or what have you, under whatever description you want. That goes on. And the fact that people think it's okay for one Skull and Bones guy to run against another Skull and Bones guy and still believe that anyone can be president in America, and we are like, that the country and the government has some connection to the people who vote for it, because there is no connection between the voter and what the people in government are doing. There is no connection. The steering wheel is no longer connected to the wheels, and we should open the door and roll out of this car. It's going off a cliff.
All right, Rich, what is the most important thing you learned from reading the works of John Taylor Gatto?
If you don't learn how to write your own script in life, someone else is going to write that script for you. That's almost a direct quote from his book, Weapons of Mass Instruction. So that's the secret. School is writing your script for you. College is writing your script for you. Your employer is writing your script for you. These are all newer aspects of the American life. They weren't always around. Prior to these governmental orchestrations of the script writing for your life, it was left to you and your family and the people you grew up around, and you actually had voluntary interaction. You had local accountability. And what they seek to do today is remove local accountability. They say, let's put the United Nations in charge of the world. Great. So now when you have a complaint, where can you go? You can't go to someone you can actually see in person who knows you, that might be accountable, like your town mayor or what have you back in the day. Now it's a extra super governmental organization that has laws that say, we took away guns in these other countries. We're going to take away the right to defend yourself in your country too. Right? Because in order to control a population, you have to make sure they can't effectively resist mentally or physically. They've done that through the school system mentally, and they're seeking to do that physically. But like I said, that's kind of a moot point to use arms against an oppressive government. But arms are very effective toward mobs of people or, you know, anyone else trying to invade your property or steal your life. That's why they were created. They are effective and they remain. And they will remain as long as there is conflict where people try to take away your freedom. It's part of the essence.
Yeah. There's a great interviewer you and I like. His name is Jan Helfeld. And I looked through the playlist a long time ago when I first started looking at him of interviews that he did. And I said, wow, he's got a lot of smart people that he's interviewing. And then I watched the interviews, and they're a lot of things, but smart isn't one of them. It seems more like they're memorizers of, you know, certain talking points or even statistics. But when they're faced with something they've never been asked before, they can't think critically, they can't think consistently, and they can't think on principle. I'm wondering what you think it means to be intelligent.
Well, one of the first signs of intelligence is being able to question your own intelligence and identify your own ignorance. There was a not so famous but should be famous study carried out, I think in 1999. It's called the Dunning-Kruger experiment. Basically what they found out is that a large amount of people can't recognize their own incompetence. I was among those people. I'm among those people many days. And I keep myself in check and don't get cocky because I know I learn so much every day that I must not have been that smart yesterday. So I try to keep it real. But most people just assume that what they've assumed is knowledge and what they've been given is knowledge. And that's very dangerous. It's deleterious to freedom, and it's dangerous to their own prospering in life. It endangers their ability to prosper because they're denying themselves their own natural ability to think. And so I enjoy thinking. I enjoy learning. I excelled at school, but it didn't make me an original thinker. I didn't have to think for myself until I witnessed and experienced things in life that there were no answers in the education heretofore. And then you got to figure out what's going on. So that's why I'm not on the scripted path. I'm on a very unscripted path. I think that's probably similar to why you're on an unscripted path and why many people watching these videos are on unscripted paths. And that should be encouraged. It shouldn't be feared. But I think that what I've taken on as part of my own responsibility is to make the best tools possible for people to explore those unscripted aspects of life so they can write their own script, so that they can be successful in their area of talent where they can develop an expertise and make it valuable to other people. So there could be a lot of wandering in the wilderness of conspiratorial information and rabbit holes. And what I like to show people is that if you understand what the answer and the solution looks like, then you don't get lost in the rabbit hole. You can actually, it's a finite planet. There's only so many, factions on this planet that could undertake an operation like 9/11. And when there are so many credible aspects that are there in the perpetration of the plot that cannot be controlled or foreseen by the claimed terrorists, it is a legitimate question to ask. Who then might have been capable of doing this? Who had the funding, the ability, the experience, the ability to cover it up, all these sort of things. And it's not the first time in history it's happened, and it's going to happen again and again in more egregious manners unless people question it and start to raise their intelligence to the level of the people taking advantage of them in these instances. I'm trying to close the knowledge gap between them, they, those who want to take away freedom, and we, the rest of us who just want to be left alone. And they maintain power through a knowledge gap that is a wealth gap, that is the information gap. And I'm always trying to build a complex but sustainable and bridge with integrity that you can cross over it and get to that understanding without having to compromise your soul to a life of evil like they do. Evil being defined as taking away the rights and freedoms of other people systematically.
that is another perfect example of why I love watching your stuff. It's so easy to pinpoint someone as evil without really defining it. Because if you get a definition down, then that definition might also apply to you, might apply to other things, and it sort of takes the power away. So that's why they'll focus on Stormy Daniels for 2 weeks, because there's no principle that's against, when it's like, how about killing civilians overseas?
It's a dumbed down perspective, whether it's John Taylor Gatto's dumbing us down or Charlotte Iserbyt's deliberate dumbing down of America. That's what it takes to caricaturize and like cartoonize reality, making it such that people are like either good or evil. It's like a lot of people do a lot of ignorant things every day that perpetrate evil. They're not meaning to do it. You make a bunch of money that year and you pay your taxes unquestioningly. The government takes those taxes, makes some smart bombs, and bombs a wedding on the other side of the world. Right? That goes on. That's part of the system of our culture. So it's not to classify anyone as good or evil, but there are degrees of this for sure. For sure. Like, is the average clerk at a mom and pop store in, Arkansas as bad as Dick Cheney or Rumsfeld or these other guys who perpetrate deceptions to kill millions of people and then get awards for it? You know what I'm saying? But the other guy, maybe like he kicked his dog or did some so there's different degrees of evil in the world. You're never going to eradicate evil. You're never going to have total peace. You're never going to have any of this stuff. But what we can do as conscious people is recognize what's going on and turn it down a little bit. Like you might never get rid of pedophilia in the Catholic Church, but you know what? Once people know what goes on, they're a lot less, a lot more likely to hesitate before sending their check or sending their kids to those schools or indoctrinating them into that system. And it's not the only broken system in the world, but it is one of the oldest and most powerful and most protected and most like you can't say anything against it. Otherwise, like you're committing some sort of, hypothetical crime. I think crime goes on in physical reality and it involves taking away people's freedom. And I don't think that comment takes away anyone's freedom. It actually helps to liberate some people.
Talking about evil, there was John McCain was on The View, one of the last big interviews he did before he died. And they said, do you have any regrets? What's your biggest regret? And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. I paused it and I said, what is he going to mention? I'm like, well, he's advocated war with Russia, China, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Libya, all these places. His biggest regret is it's got to be Iraq or maybe, being part of the Keating Five. By the way, I had dinner with Charles Keating and got to talk to him about that before Keating died.
That's the savings and loan scandal. So to give people context, savings and loan scandal was intermixed with the BCCI, Iran-Contra, drug money, terrorism, laundering, funding, all that stuff. And McCain was in the midst of it. Not his first scandal either.
And McCain's answer on The View was, I just, it has to be, something like standing. One time I stood and took a picture in front of a Confederate flag, and I'm just never going to let that down. And it's like death toll from standing under flag, 0. Yeah. Death toll from your foreign policy. Yeah. The list just goes on, and that's why it's so important to have a good definition of evil.
He's a war hawk, but he's like a fourth generation type of war hawk. His dad, who was John McCain Jr., I believe was his name. Do you know anything about his dad? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. I only learned this a couple weeks ago. So the backstory is we shot this interview with Sergeant Bryce Lockwood, who's the only surviving Marine from the USS Liberty. Not the only living Marine he's the only Marine to survive the attack in 1967. And so we interviewed him for like 4 hours. And during the interview, there's a lot of interesting aspects that come up. In editing the footage, now I'm seeing this interview for this 4 hours several times, like 16 hours worth of watching the 4 hours, right? You've seen it several times. And I'm talking to somebody about what I'm what I'm researching, because he's talking about Moshe Dayan during the conversation. I said, who's he? So at home, I'm looking him up on Wikipedia. Oh, he's the Israeli defense minister. He orders the attack on the USS Liberty. Then I dig a little deeper. How did he get trained? How did he get to be defense minister? Oh, he was part of Haganah, which was like Irgun. It was a Israeli proto-Israeli defense force. He gets into the British Army and starts working with British intelligence. Okay, so the guy who ordered the attack on the USS Liberty was trained by British intelligence. These guys who follow the USS Liberty, all these veterans, they knew nothing about this because nobody had ever looked up and said who, what, where, when, why, and how about all these things, right? So I'm starting to share this information with them. I'm pretty proud of myself. I'm like, oh, we figured out, this aspect, and that makes a lot of sense. And then somebody mentions to me, one of my buddies, is like, yeah, John McCain's dad was involved in the investigation. And I said, well, that's part of the point, is there hasn't been an investigation. He says, check it out. So I look it up, and sure enough, his dad ran the official inquiry, which resulted in it was an accident explanation. So his dad had already run cover for Israel back when it was a clear, you can deem it an act of war or what have you, but it was intentional. It was intentional. It may have been that, if it's intentional and they attacked us on purpose and we forgave them to maintain foreign policy, that'd be one thing. But they've told these guys and their families and all the families of the guys who died that it was an accident. And they find that a little hard to swallow because it's not the truth. And it's still not true 51 years later. So John McCain's dad was instrumental in what has been a 51-year cover-up of Israel's attack on a NSA Navy spy ship, a Navy ship with NSA personnel and equipment on it, state of the art. So.
I interviewed James Perloff, and he makes a funny point. He goes, Keith, we go to war based off the Gulf of Tonkin, a fake incident, but nothing happens from the USS Liberty 3 years later, a real incident. I mean, come on.
Right,
and
there's a meme.
It's so funny putting that into perspective.
Yeah, there's a meme about that too. Like, Gulf of Tonkin, 0 people died, 58,000 people on our side die because of that, and then you got 34 sailors who die, and nobody goes. We don't go to war with anybody over that. There's so much to it. There's so much to it. You can read like the memoirs of Barry Goldwater. He's an Arizona senator, right? You know about him? He wrote a book called With No Apologies. It's like his memoirs. And in chapters 32 and 33, he talks about the Cecil Rhodes acolytes and the CFR and the Bilderberg and the Trilateral and New World Order, and how Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski cherry-picked Jimmy Carter to be president, and how they put him in office, and then Iran hostages, all that stuff. It makes so much more sense. And here it is, in the words of a very respectable senator who had run for president against, I think he ran against Nelson Rockefeller back in the 60s, I thought, back in anyway, too much history has passed and so much reading that needs to be done. But Alan Dulles said it, I think, the best, that when they asked him about, aren't you concerned that people are going to see the inconsistencies in this Warren Commission report? He's like, yeah. The longer quote is, very few people will actually read it, and those who do, we basically own them. There will be college professors and people like that. And he says the American people don't read. So he wasn't ever scared of all those gangster tactics and things that they were doing at the time being uncovered, revealed in the system that existed then. But now we have the internet. Now the world's attention is not just controlled by 3 or 4 companies that are owned by the military industrial media complex, right? Right now, we still have the ability to press record, put some stuff out there. A couple thousand people come in contact with it. And you know what? Maybe a couple of those people talk to a few other people. And that is slowly it's not within my purview to change anyone else's mind. They have to do that for themselves. What I like to do is offer them the opportunities again and again and again. You can lead a man to knowledge, but you can't make him think.
Yeah, that was probably the most important thing I learned from the Candles in the Dark seminar with Larkin Rose. His assistant, Amanda, said, you can invite someone to accept an idea, you can't force them to. And that's so powerful because it doesn't really work to beat someone over the head with it. For me, it was just it was seeing the Alex Jones video where he quotes David Rockefeller's memoirs. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, page 504. You know, he says
I
a lot
know.
of people accuse my family of being internationalists, and he's like, that's true, and then we're doing it. So what? What are you going to do about it? That's paraphrased, of course. It's paraphrased, but it's very accurate.
I remember seeing that and being like, oh, wow, a fake quote has gone on the internet, whatever. And I said, and then I looked, and there were so many people saying it that I'm like, I just got to get this book on Amazon so I can get it out of my head. And then I ordered the soft cover, and it's there. It's literally there. And all that's on my television screen is whether Brett Kavanaugh, did something.
You're right. That's the bread and circus, man. That's the entertainment for people who haven't like trained their brain. If you haven't trained your brain, they have made scripts for you. You can load them out there. But if you want to train your brain, I bought 2 copies of that Rockefeller memoir just to make sure it wasn't just a paperback revision. I went and got a first edition hardcover. That's how I got into collecting books. Is I wanted the first edition, first printing of Colonel House's Intimate Papers, printed by Charles Seymour of Yale in the 1920s. It's like a 5-volume set. It's hard to get today, and it's even harder to get if you want to get the first edition hard copy of that, right? But I used to invest what little money I was making online from the podcast and doing the online community into the assets that would eventually liberate people. Once I get to like do the analysis and show them what's in the private papers, right? I've taken samples of it out where they're talking about the Federal Reserve and, how he's puppeting Wilson and, all these sort of things, right? Like the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes from 1902. I didn't really believe that. Quigley's talking about it. I was like, whatever. I got the 1902 first edition Cecil Rhodes Last Will and Testament book, written by William T. Stead, who was part of his roundtable group. And I have William T. Stead's copy. So the guy who wrote the book, who was Rhodes's executor on the will, he wrote the book. I have his copy because I found the guy who bought everything from Review of the Reviews, bought the entire library, and I made him a deal to get the book. So I have that book. I have the book written by the guy who said, here's the will and testament of Cecil Rhodes. And from that, you have the Pilgrim Society, the CFR, Bilderberg, Trilateral, all these working groups to make that a reality. And today with American, like that American chick, that actress married into the British royal family, like they're sealing the deal. There's a lot of queen worship in this country. She's in People magazine. She's getting real popular. Like we're getting popular, like contact with the British royal family. There's no problem that they think there's like king and queen and that they're, House of Lords. That's all the stuff we wanted to get away from years ago. But now it's like being normalized along with a bunch of other crazy messed up stuff, right? Like we see that Jimmy Savile thing go on in Britain. We're like, oh, that's so horrible. That guy worked for the BBC and he had a children's show and he abused these people for like 40 years systematically with all in full view of the Queen and all these other people who should have prevented it, but they covered it up, right? That all goes on. That's a tragedy. It's atrocious. Any number of curse words I could use for it. There was a guy at the BBC while Jimmy Savile's working there. He's the director general of the BBC. And people accused him of helping to cover up the Jimmy Savile stuff. And I said, well, obviously these are just like, conspiracy theorists. Let me look into this. And sure enough, the guy who was the director general of the BBC helped to cover up and ignored complaints and people blowing the whistle. And this was like in court transcripts where he was being questioned, like the affidavits and stuff like that. That's awful and atrocious as well, because not only is the Savile guy doing the criminal things, unspeakable criminal things, but his employer, the BBC, who Orwell called Big Brother, right? Big Brother. That's Big Brother, is covering it up. Again, unspeakably atrocious and horrible. Where's that guy now that covered it up, that worked for the BBC? He's in charge of the New York Times at the time when Trump is elected and all that other stuff goes on with, people talking about pizza and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see these things permeate. It's like, I'm sure when they brought this guy in the New York Times, they didn't lead with, hey, this is the guy who successfully covered up Jimmy Savile, and let it go on an extra 10 years or something until he died. Or maybe they did. Maybe that's how he got the job. Maybe that's the real job interview. There's that, they made the book, I think it was 7 Days of the Condor, and then they made it into a movie called 3 Days of the Condor. Robert Redford, very good film from the 70s. And in one of the last scenes, Robert Redford's like the CIA whistleblower, and he's going to blow the whistle. And he's talking to this guy who's in the government. And he's kind of like on the fence. He's like a friendly guy. He's not one of the guys trying to like kill him. And he says, what's your plan? He's like, well, I gave it to the New York Times. People are going to know. They need to know about this. And the other guy says, well, what if they don't print it? Meaning that the CIA already owned all type of media establishments of any type of consequence. They've got lots of quotes. It was called Operation Mockingbird. There's all sorts of CIA operations to control the media going back to World War I, pre-CIA, pre-OSS, where it was a United States Congressman, Oscar Callaway, in 1918, who stated that like the entire media was bought up by the robber barons and the shipping magnates, and that people back then in World War I were already being propagandized to the tune of whatever these people wanted to have the shots called. They're like, hate Germany, get in, Britain's our friend, let's go to war. And it has never ceased since then. Early example would be Hearst and Spanish-American War, what they called yellow journalism. So this has been an ever-growing trend popularized in the 1920s by Lippmann and Bernays, who wrote propaganda and these types of books that were controlling public opinion. And here we are 100 years later. People are totally subjected and subverted and submissive to these types of trends. The use of information, because people figured out how people work. Some people studied that and wanted to manipulate people, and everyone else just wanted to be left alone. Well, if you leave that go for 100 years, now you got a bunch of people who just want to be left alone, but you can't be left alone because these other people have created a society where you've got to play their game in order to survive, or they'll shut you off.
I think he is a whistleblower. Great research on World War I media manipulation is a guy named Benjamin Friedman. Gave a speech in 1961 at a hotel, and his book Facts or Facts. Yeah.
At the Willard Hotel. He gave a speech, and he said that he was with these guys at the Versailles Treaty, and that he had owned, Benjamin Friedman owned a soap company, like a big soap company. And back then, soap companies, they funded entertainment. This is where we get soap operas from. Sponsoring by soap companies of this entertainment content. So he was a rich, powerful, influential guy. He's around all these guys, Bernard Baruch, all these guys who were involved with the Federal Reserve. He's involved with all the guys getting America into World War I. He was at the Versailles Peace Treaty. And in 1961 at the Willard Hotel, this is also available in transcript form in his book, Facts or Facts, he gives a speech. The audio of the speech is attainable if you went on YouTube and typed in Benjamin Friedman, Facts or Facts, you'll get the speech. It's a very different story than what we are traditionally told. When you check out the veracity of the claims that he's making, there is far too much substance to the claims he's making to dismiss them as conspiracy theory, to dismiss them as anti-Semitism. I believe Friedman was Jewish, so I would listen to what he has to say, because it's a rare perspective and insight into somebody who was there, involved in these things, and later disagreed with how those things were taking a turn. So a very interesting character. I would consider him a whistleblower. That's a disclosure, just like Kay Griggs. I don't know if you've ever seen the Kay Griggs tapes, but like 15 years ago, I bought some DVDs off eBay, because this is before Google Video or YouTube or anything. I used to buy everything off, you go on YouTube you go on eBay and type in like conspiracy videos or whatever, and you get Waco, all these different movies about different conspiracies. Anyway, Kay Griggs was married to this guy who was high up in the intelligence realm, and she gives this story to her pastor on a DVD they're filming. It's like 5 hours. And I watched it and I was like, wow, that's a really crazy story. And then over the years, as I continued to learn about the Eastern establishment power structure, the intelligence agencies, and all this sort of stuff, I kept coming across names that I was like, hey, that lady that tells that crazy story, she was talking about that guy, Jim Gray, or, Albert Stubblebine, or whoever. all these characters. And there's a lot of veracity in her story. I don't know if she's still alive. I don't know whatever happened to her, but that's an example of a whistleblower. This wife who had gone through this whole relationship with the insight of being privy to her husband's diary and journal and stuff like this, seeing him groomed at the Harvard eating clubs, seeing him participate in homosexual acts with other dudes because that was part of what those people were all into. And she was like a Southern Belle Christian Baptist type of no shenanigans type of lady. So it's interesting to hear her tell the story being like a fly on the wall in these events where it's like, I don't know, it's some eyes wide shut type of stuff going on, you know, not to the degree of sacrifice, but when she talks about the shellback ceremony, when the sailors cross the equator, there's a whole bunch of different things, cherry marines that she talks about. And this is something that goes on with British intelligence tradecraft, that they find agents who are homosexual to be preferable and more useful in getting blackmail on other agents. Cambridge 5 included a lot of those. So anyway, when you go through the history of British intelligence, that is a popular MO that they like to use. They got the drop on Alan Dulles in like 1916 by using a honeypot on him. They got him involved sleeping with a foreign spy who then stole information, and then they knew she stole the information so they could blackmail and control him throughout the rest of his term as an American political agent.
Does the intimate papers of Colonel House, known as Woodrow Wilson's handler, does that mention Samuel Untermeyer at all?
I would be hesitant to guess off the top of my head. I'm sure that he has writings back and forth with Bernard Baruch, Untermeyer, all the characters that Friedman names. I just don't remember or recall having found those quotes in the specific volumes, because what I've got, the books are so old, they're fragile. So what I've gone into those books for was there are quotes that are attributed to Colonel House. There's one in particular that is very popular that is found nowhere in his writings, and that I think is an amalgamation, not a total hoax, but so I've gone in there to find and source out particular quotes that are, you know, claimed to be in these books. But I haven't like explored them in their totality to be like, all right, let's see all these people that are, you know, named by Friedman. Let's cross-reference and see how many of these were writing letters back and forth with Colonel House and are captured in these papers. Right. But there's also, several other resources that do kind of catalog the intimate papers of Colonel House. And like, for instance, there was this one quote by Woodrow Wilson about like, I've unwittingly ruined my country. And it's attributed and said like he wrote this after he did the Federal Reserve. Like he's lamenting the Federal Reserve. And then other people will be like, no, that book comes from his campaign speeches. It was written before the Federal Reserve, right? So there's all this like muddiness to it. Well, the only way to figure these things out is to get yourself a first edition copy and go in there and figure it out. And what you do is you find, here's where he says this sentence, and now here's where he says these two sentences, and here's where he says this other sentence, and now this is where the quote's coming from, and now you show people that, and then you show them the bigger quote. The bigger quote is actually worse than what he was saying in this misattributed, concocted quote that they're passing around. He's saying there exists a group of people that have so much power that you don't even speak above your breath about them, right? He says that these things are controlling our politics, right? So he's saying it in his own words. He's just not saying it in such a succinct format that you could post it on a Twitter meme. So people try to shorten it, and then people try to verify that. They're like, that's a fake quote. Yes, there are fake quotes out there about Colonel House, about where they're going to use the Social Security and inventory, the biological, blah, blah, blah. That's a fake quote. There's no aspects of that quote in his, in like Woodrow Wilson's book. I think it was called The New Freedom. But these other quotes that talk about there being a world government, a super governmental force that's influencing politics, that's all real. It's in his book. And whether it's like Patrick Bet-David or like Neil deGrasse Tyson, if people are if people aren't tied to, I think I already have the whole story. If Degrasse Tyson's like, well, I know a little bit about it, but what else can I learn about it? There's a lot of interesting points about it, about 9/11, about World War II, about any of these things. And I think to poo-poo conspiracy theory is like a shortcut to thinking. It says, I don't have the time, inclination, aptitude, or want to go through and read Operation Northwoods, right? And if you won't do that, then you either have to think that the government is as white as the driven snow, like it's pure, or like you have to assume that what I'm extracting from that is true. And I don't want either of those situations. I would like people to actually like dig in, do some reading, check it out, share it with your friends. These are the types of actions that don't cost a lot of money, but could definitely save and proliferate and protect freedom.
Yeah, it's always funny seeing Degrasse Tyson, Richard Dawkins, and Sam Harris say, these religious people are so dumb they don't look for evidence. Meanwhile, it's the greatest case of projection I think I've ever seen.
I don't know, dude, like science. People are like, because the people who say God doesn't exist, they're all into science, right? Okay. So science presumes that there's a reason behind everything, right? Like science gives you answers for that. Like, why does the moon do that? Science has an answer. Why does the sun do that? The science has an answer. Why does this weather do that? Science has an answer. Okay. So how is there, like, there's conscious reason built into the entire system, right? You've got animals that have got protective coloring that helps them in an evolutionary sense that they don't have the capacity to control themselves or even observe. How's that go on? And so by maybe thinking that there is no God and like science is it and there's nothing else to be discovered, I don't know, is the universe stopped yet? I think the universe is a learning machine, and as long as it goes on, there's going to be learning available for those who want to think. And I think other people are just confined to be like, I think these people a couple hundred years ago figured it out and there's no God. Like, you know, Nietzsche said God was dead, and then God said Nietzsche was dead. Or these people a couple thousand years ago, they said this guy Moses and this dude Jesus and there's other things going on. Like, I don't know about all that. And I think that those stories have been used to control a lot of people's actions over the course of history. It makes for good personnel management when you can be like, I have a book and it says this, and we all listen. Like, I caught part of that movie, The Book of Eli, last night with Denzel Washington and Gary Oldman. There's some pretty good quotes in there about like how the bad guys view a book like the Bible. Like, this is good for people control. We must have this book. It's the only Bible left on the planet. We could control everybody with this, right? So, you know, we're born into it. It was going on when we got here. A lot of us spend a lot of time trying to figure out how it works, what's going on. Some of us spend time trying to share that knowledge with other people so they can figure that out for themselves. But I think the concerns and everyday actions of most anyone who's either part of this call or watching this call are very, very, very different than the people who are actually claiming to have ownership over you and making decisions about you and your family's freedom for generations now and to come. Very different priorities, very different outlooks, very different information sets that they're acting on.
One of the books that helped me think consistently, think critically, was a book called The Use and Abuse of Logic by Madsen Prairie, where he just lists like 100 logical fallacies, gives you the definition, gives you examples. I'm curious what you think are some of the most important logical fallacies for intellectual self-defense.
Appeal to popularity. Bandwagon technique of propaganda, that's the same thing, where just because a whole bunch of people say it, like, truth is not found by consensus. That's science. I agree with that. So just because 99 people say that's how it is doesn't mean that the one person saying something else isn't the person who's right. So, and that's the difference between a constitutional republic and a democracy. The democracy is truth by consensus. All these people say this, so it must be true. Constitutional republic says even in that one person who disagrees, they still get their rights. That's the difference, right? So when I have a senator from Connecticut or a congressman from Connecticut last week saying that internet censorship is necessary for the continuity of democracy, I'd say, first off, dude, the only reason you have a position or any type of power is because of the Constitution. So if you want to undermine that, then go get another job. Secondly, this is a constitutional republic. It's not a democracy. Okay. So the fact that you don't even know that and you're one of the people who have influence in running this country, it's kind of embarrassing. Right. But I don't have time. Like, I don't want to take his job. So I'll just let him like do what he does and I'll do what I do and he leaves me alone. But there's a serious problem here of a bunch of people who are taking actions as a group, and those actions are based out of ignorance. And when those actions can be magnified by social media and add enormous amounts of people to the group, because there is no bar for admission. It's all just like the less you think, the more you join. And I don't know. It's like, I see it from the perspective of, I didn't vote for Trump, and I sure as hell wasn't going to vote for Hillary unless I had a gun to my head. I don't vote at all because I don't believe in that system. The last time I voted was 2004. I voted for Libertarian presidential candidate Michael Badnarik. And after I saw how that turned out, I said, that's a waste of time, energy, and attention on my part. To think that I'm casting a vote and it somehow is going to determine the leadership of the criminal cartel that runs this country, I don't think so. So I see it as 50% of this country didn't even participate in the charade. 25% supported Hillary, 25% supported Trump, and that's how it shakes out. And that 25 can argue with that other 25 as long as they know there's another 50% of us sitting around saying, both you guys are wrong. Like, that's unfreedom and that's unfreedom, and the choice between the lesser evil is still evil. So I'd rather not participate in that. But I'm going to continue to speak out because we got this taxation without representation thing going on. So I'm paying my speaker fee and I'm using my right to speak.
What is the purpose of your excellent website, tragedyandhope.com?
It's a landing zone where you can come to find some real threads that connect to freedom. And those threads start with identifying all these aspects of history that have been specifically hidden to provide us with a very different picture. So as you replace one of your factual, or like your fallacious assumptions, the Japanese got us into World War II, with some real knowledge that there was a group of people that wanted us to get into the war and they benefited from that and they did that. You slowly transition for yourself through each piece of media with the ability to choose the bigger picture, like choose the HD view and not the 480p view. They're giving us a very small definition. Here's like why we're in Syria. Well, if you want the bigger picture of that, like who is controlled, like who's funded Syria? Like traditionally Russia has funded Syria for like the past 40 years. Oh, so us messing with Syria is really messing with Russia by proxy. Oh, okay. I understand that geopolitically now. Thank you. Right. It's those little aspects that are left out of the public narratives. And that's what gets people emotional. When you get emotional, guess what? Your thinking shuts off. It like brings out, in the occasions of emotional triggering, it's like brings out the worst in humanity. There's a lot of emotional aspects to human beingness that are wonderful. Caring, loving, sharing, doing for others, donating, charity, all these things. But there's also aspects of our emotional attitudes that are being used against us, that are being used to destroy freedom. And the people that are carrying it out don't even know that they're doing it, which is going back to the Dunning-Kruger experiment. People so incompetent they can't recognize their own incompetence, so they rate themselves as being highly competent. I think that's found in the actions, not the claims.
All right. Final question for you. Thank you for being with me so long.
Thanks for having a great list of questions, dude. You're well prepared.
All right. So let's say there is, you can recommend one book for everyone in the world to read. I'm curious, what one book would that be?
I'm going to give you two books, because if you read the book I tell you, then you want to read this other book too. And you don't want to just leave off at one book. So the book I would recommend overall, you want to see globalism for what it is, what it will be. You read Tragedy and Hope 101 by Joseph Plummer, available on Amazon. It's available on Kindle. It's available on audio. And it's a condensed Cliff Notes type version of Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope and Quigley's Anglo-American Establishment. Fantastic book. So that gives you the foundational education. You can read it in the afternoon. The next book would be The New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism by Sean Stone. And if you have trouble getting started with either book, just read the foreword that I wrote for the New World Order book. And that's like 30 pages. It's easy read, and it'll key you in on why you need to read both those books. The answer's in the foreword.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this interview. I had such a blast doing this. Please like, subscribe, and check out Richard's website, tragedyandhope.com, and check out those books that he mentioned there at the end. Rich, thanks so much for your time.
Hey, before you go, Keith, I got to give you props. I watched the ultimate red pill video, the 5-hour libertarian philosophy video that you made. And when I shared it in the Tragedy and Hope community, because I was like, hey, everybody, check this out. People were like, oh, it's like a 5-hour video version of a Peace Revolution episode. And that got me to thinking that it'd be cool to do an interim episode where I take this interview that we just did, take your ultimate red pill audio from that video, and I'll put it out as like the intermission between my two 20-hour Peace Revolution episodes on libertarianism. I think you've earned a good spot, and I like to support people who are up and coming. I think you got talent, and that needs to be encouraged right now, not discouraged. And it would be great for my audience. I think my audience needs to hear those clips.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for plugging that in. Thank you to everyone for watching.